the Western fantasy journey that began with Game of Thrones. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 26. The Swamp People Who Can Perform Magic. It is easy to get rid of a drunkard. You can hide in the shadow of the nearest corner with your height, and then watch him go downstairs in a hurry. But just as the other party saw, Renly did not plan to go back to the room. Instead, he was going to visit the Cranberry Man. Yes, a visit. He was going to visit openly, not sneakily or anything else. Because there was no need. Only he could smell that unique fragrance. Who could have guessed what his purpose and intention were? But Renly did not plan to go alone, because that would not stretch out. So he first ran to a certain floor of the tower, called up Fat Alan and Skinny Barrack, and then continued to go downstairs. Why do we have to go to find the Cranberry Man? Fat asked while yawning. Children love to sleep. Although this one was happy to participate in the lively banquet, he left earlier than Renly. I heard that the people of the marshland eat frogs. The skinny guy next to him also complained, and they are all made of mud. Haven't you heard that he can do magic? Renly said casually. How can you not go and see this? The meesters in Old Town all said that magic is just a lie. Skinny Barrack was dismissive of this, and Fatty also shrank his neck when he heard it. You mean witches? I won't go. Witches are too scary. He said this, but he didn't turn around and leave. Obviously, he was still curious about this, so Renly added, I heard that he can make frogs speak. Fatty really took the bait when he heard it. Seeing Renly lift his foot and continue to walk forward, he unconsciously followed him. Really? I heard it too, so I want to see it, and there are so many people living around. What's there to be afraid of? The children's conversation gradually faded away with the sound of footsteps. The central tower of Storm's End was tall and huge, and even the storage and armory were all in this building. Being in the upper area of the tower, Renly could not hear the noisy sound of the banquet below. No servants followed them, because there were too many people participating in the banquet, and the servants were all busy. They needed to serve not only the northern lords and nobles, but also the riders and knights of each family, the relevant servants, and many ordinary soldiers. In fact, the banquet in the hall on the first floor was only the most core one. In the many courtyards outside the tower, there were also firelight and tents, and the noisy sound and the smell of food filled the entire castle. There were so many people, and there were countless problems, such as the housing in the castle was very tight. But that was only for ordinary soldiers. As one of the main lords in the north, the marshlander that Renly had seen before had his own single room. After following the scent to find the other party's living room, Renly raised his hand and knocked on the door. After a while, the old heavy wooden door creaked open, and a thin face with long brown hair appeared from it. Hello, Lord Reed. Renly greeted him. Renly, who was familiar with the family emblems of the nobles of the Seven Kingdoms, knew very well which family the emblem the other party had worn before represented. The Reed family of Greywater Watch, which ruled the entire neck swamp. Hello, children. The marshland looked at the three children running outside the door with his deep green eyes. Are you lost? We came to visit you, sir. Renly replied, and then the fat man next to him couldn't wait to ask without his signal. Do you really know magic? Make frogs speak? When Fatty spoke, there was still some vigilance in his little eyes, but more of curiosity. Who did you hear this from? The other party couldn't help frowning when he heard it. As a swamp dweller, he knew very well what the impression of them was in various parts of the Seven Kingdoms. Weird customs, frog eaters, mud figures, sneaky. But this did not include magic. Master Crescent said so. Fatty said without hesitation. He believed it, but if the other party continued to ask, then Fatty would answer that it was Renly who said Master Crescent said so, not that he heard it directly. However, the Swamplander did not ask further, but rubbed his rough cheeks and patiently explained, I don't know magic. Your meester may have told you some legends and anecdotes, but such stories are everywhere in Westeros. What kind of legend? The fat man asked entangledly. He had heard Renly say before that, even if the other party knew magic, he would not admit it directly. and the other party looked short and thin at this time, not scary at all, so he unconsciously became bolder. Of course it's the legend of the children of the forest. What are the children of the forest? The children of the forest are of course the children of the forest. It seemed that he had never met such a chattering child, and the short swamplander was a little uncomfortable, but he seemed to have a good personality and still patiently explained. When the other party was talking, Renly kept staring at his mouth opening and closing, but the fragrance did not become more serious because of this, which was different from the former instructor of Storm's End. Then he realized that what he was looking for was not teeth, but something else. Renly then focused his attention on the chest of the other's grey linen shirt, where a lizard lion emblem that looked very similar to a crocodile was embroidered. After observing for a few seconds, the psychic property was activated, and the originally motionless crocodile turned its empty eyes to Renly, and at the same time, its black silk body began to emit a faint green light. But before Renly could figure out what this meant, the crevasse man suddenly stopped talking, and then his eyes strangely scanned the dark corridor outside the door. After not finding anything unusual, he turned his head and looked into the house. What did he find? Renly was startled at this, but then his blue eyes looked at the dagger on the other's waist. A wooden dagger inserted in a faded cowhide sheath. The fragrance was emitted from this dagger. Renly's mind raced, and he suddenly said, "Lord Reed, can you show me this dagger?" Dagger? Hearing this, the other party turned his head and looked at him, then smiled and said, "No, this dagger is very sharp. You can't touch it." Renly felt that this matter was a bit difficult, but he did not give up. "Can I wear gloves, or just touch its handle?" Unfortunately, the other party still did not give in. Instead, he narrowed his eyes and asked doubtfully, "Why do you want to see my dagger, child?" Renly told the truth, "Because I feel it is very special." The other party was stunned when he heard this. "Why do you say that?" "I don't know, it's just a feeling." The black-haired boy looked serious, blinking his eyes to observe how the other party would react, but unfortunately the boy did not fall for it. He neither asked more questions nor agreed to let Renly see the dagger, but just looked at the boy deeply. "It's nothing special, just a bronze dagger. Child, maybe you saw it wrong," he said, and glanced around again, and said casually, "Now, please allow me to go back to my room to rest. Children, the march is long, and it is really tiring." Renly was a little unwilling to do so, but he still nodded very straightforwardly, and said goodbye politely. "Thank you, sir. I wish you a good dream." After that, he led the two little friends to turn around and leave. The door behind him closed tightly without any hesitation. "He doesn't know magic at all." After walking away, Fatty complained, "And I feel that he is very timid, as if he is afraid that someone will suddenly jump out of the corridor to scare him. He is very small." The thin bamboo pole snorted, "Just like those wizards who say they can do magic, but the wizards can't even withstand a knight's attack. When I was in Black Harbor, I saw a wizard in a red robe." Renly didn't listen to what they said. He was thinking about how to get the dagger. All the previous words were just probing words. If the other party did not cherish the dagger, he could try to take it directly. Unfortunately, the situation was completely opposite to what he expected. Soft means didn't work, so should he use force? Thinking of this, Renly couldn't help but touch his chest. Under the soft green velvet fabric, a ring bulged, which comforted him a little, but he was also hesitant. That marshlander didn't seem to be simple. Whether Renly wanted to take a risk or hesitated, reality did not give him the opportunity to launch a big move. Because when he got up the next day, he suddenly found that he could not smell that smell. Then he heard something. The marshlander left. Renly, who was bending down to put on his boots, paused, then raised his head and looked at the servant Jeremy, who ran to call him for breakfast. "Yes, Lord Stark and several other lords from the north have left." The short servant nodded. "I saw them leave the city early before dawn, and they didn't bring any troops. I don't know why they are so anxious." Renly sighed and felt helpless when he heard this. The time was too short to do anything. "Let's wait until he comes back," he thought. The northern army was still in Storm's End. As one of the main lords in the north, it was impossible for the marshalander not to come back, unless. However, this idea was disrupted by something that happened suddenly. Go to King's Landing? In the Meester's room, the black-haired boy couldn't help but frown at what Master Crescent said. Chapter 27 Departure. When Renly heard about this, he was running to history class, but he was suddenly hit by a blow on the head. Robert asked Stannis to go to King's Landing. Why should I follow him? In the Meester's room, the boy across the small table protested. He was still thinking about waiting for the short cranberry man to return and then find a way to steal his dagger, but if he went to King's Landing now, he might not be able to see him. I think he must have his reasons. The morning sun shone in from the narrow window, embedded in the side rock wall, covering half of the old man's smiling face. Although it was covered with wrinkles, it seemed full of vitality, but the face covered by the shadow on the other side looked very old. Maybe Robert missed his dear little brother. But forget it. Renly curled his lips when he heard this. When he was less than 1 year old, his parents in this life died in a shipwreck. The old Meester and a recently deceased uncle were responsible for taking care of the 3 brothers, but after all, it was not as good as having biological parents. And although they are brothers, he is more than 10 years older than his 2 older brothers, Robert and Stannis. The generation gap is huge, and they are not of the same generation at all. At the same time, the former ran away to the valley to be an adopted son early and rarely came back, while the latter had a sour face all day long, as if everyone owed him money. In this case, although they felt a sense of intimacy when they met, the 3 brothers actually did not have much affection. Can I not go? I feel a little pain in my stomach. I seem to be sick. He tried to solve it in a roundabout way. It's okay. The old man said slowly, there are still 3 days before the departure time, child. I will find a way to cure your illness. Will it slow down if I follow them? Renly frowned and pretended to be worried. What if Robert calls Stannis for something urgent? Won't it delay us? Don't worry about that. The old man waved his hand. It's not that urgent. I can't ride a horse. How can I get there? Of course there is a carriage. Renly felt that he was a little at a loss for words. After sighing, he changed the subject and asked, then will you come with us, Master Crescent? I serve this castle, child. The old man shook his head. I will assist Seromus in managing this castle, and then wait for you to come back. Seromus is the great uncle of Fat Alan. His full name is Romus Estimant. Now he seems to have been appointed as the acting Lord of Storm's End. Child, King's Landing is not that scary. You are already an adult. You should go out and see the world. These words sounded like coaxing a child. Renly rolled his eyes when he heard them. Okay, we'll set off in 3 days. Yes, after the main force is ready. Renly nodded and stopped asking about this question. Instead, he started asking about today's class. The old man replied, today we are talking about the conquest of Dawn. The author of this book is Darren I, the 8th king of the Targaryen dynasty who sat on the Iron Throne. He is also known as Darren the Young Dragon. He was only 14 years old. Are you really leaving, Renly? Fat Alan ran up at the end of the class, along with Beric Dondarrion. We agreed to go to the Isle of Ethmond. I told my uncle that I would prepare a stew of the largest turtle for you. Wait until I come back. Renly looked at him and answered. He was holding a leather-bound parchment book under his armpit at this time. This was the homework he needed to read recently. When will you be back? Fat Alan asked while jumping up the stairs. I don't know. Renly sighed beside him. If you ask me, I don't want to go. I'm leaving too. The skinny Beric nodded and said, go back to Black Harbor. The war is over, and my knights will come to pick me up. Many knights of the Dondarrion family had followed Robert to participate in the war, so he and 2 guards were left in Storm's End. Fatty felt even more depressed when he heard this. You all left, so I'll leave too. There's nothing fun in Storm's End. Did your father ask you to go back? The skinny asked curiously. Why do I have to be called by my father to go back? How else would you go back? Turn into a turtle and swim back? Seeing that the conversation was a little dangerous, Renly interrupted them appropriately. Aren't your great uncle and cousin still here? I hate my cousin. He always pats me on the back of the head. Fatty frowned. Doesn't he know that patting a child on the head will make the child stupid? I suspect that this is his plan, so that I can become a fool and then occupy my inheritance rights. You know, his inheritance order is lower than mine. Children naturally have their own troubles, but Fatty did not say much about such household chores, but looked at the skinny guy and squinted his eyes. Berry, how about I give you a new nickname? Forget it, don't even think about insulting my name again. The other party stared at him vigilantly. Lightning Boy. Fatty said to himself, I've been thinking about this name for a long time. What do you think? I feel it's a bit strange. What about Master Lightning? No, not Lightning King. What's your name? Turtle King. I think the Turtle Prince of Ethmond Island sounds better. The Turtle Prince who doesn't wipe his butt. Children's emotions come and go as they please. The sadness of parting made them depressed at first, but it disappeared after a while. They didn't think it was a big deal. From the tower to the courtyard, from the courtyard to the Godswood. Although Renly didn't like the two little guys' games, he felt reluctant to leave when he really had to leave. For a year, they basically met every day and were inseparable. After trying to dig out a sparrow's nest in the dense Godswood without success, they sat under the oak tree and talked about their future plans. Dondarrion, the skinny guy, hopes to become a great knight, while Alan, the fat guy, thinks that as long as he can inherit his own island of Ethmond safely, it will be good enough. Renly hopes that they can both get what they want. What about you, Renly? What do you plan to do in the future? Asked Dondarrion. I want to be a traveler, Renly replied while leaning against the shade of a tree. The conquest of Dawn, that was originally tucked under his armpit, has been used as a cushion by him. Go to the north, to see the Great Wall, go to Dawn to see the desert, and I plan to go to the free trade city across the narrow sea. I heard that there is a very strange city there. Their people's daily routine is controlled by 3 big bells: getting up, sleeping, working, and resting. Apart from the things brought by the Goldfinger, Renly did plan this way. This is too strange. Dondarrion commented on this, and Alan, the fat guy, asked a more practical question. Should I care about peeing? I'm curious, too. Then when you know, be sure to come back and tell me. No problem. Don't forget, I've always felt that your memory is not very good. No matter how people feel, time always runs at its fixed frequency, neither fast nor slow, but no one can resist it. 3 days passed in a flash. After saying goodbye to his 2 friends and acquaintances in the castle, on a gloomy morning on the 3rd day, Renly got into a carriage and officially set out on the road to King's Landing, the capital of the 7 kingdoms. Thank you to the book friend Jifangui for the 500 reward, and thank you to the book friend Tawasinran for the 100 reward. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 28: The Taste of King's Landing. What can a gold dragon buy? On the morning of the 4th day after the journey, Renly, who was squatting in front of the extinguished fire, turned around and asked Davos beside him. At this time, they were in a dense forest. Behind them was a canvas tent dyed light yellow and embroidered with a crowned stag. There were 7 or 8 such tents scattered around, all of which were set up by the people on the trip last night. And behind the group of tents, the sound of a rushing river was endless. The fresh air in the forest in the early morning seemed to have stimulated the vitality of the group of people. So although it was still early, most of the knights and squires had been up for a long time, and they were walking around the camp, brushing and feeding horses, or stretching their limbs, and doing morning exercises. If you don't consider the embroidery, the tent behind us is probably worth a silver stag, the thin former smuggler answered. At this time, he was wearing a set of black linen clothes and brown breeches, and the cloak he was wearing was still grey and inconspicuous. Sitting in front of the extinguished bonfire, he held a branch in his right hand and casually dug into the ashes in front of him, while his left hand was wrapped in bandages and laid across his knees, not daring to move. Stannis had previously cut off the tips of the 5 fingers on his left hand, and also personally knighted him. But the division of territory requires the permission of Robert, the current Duke of Storm's End, and Stannis does not have this right at the moment. Therefore, Davos will also go to King's Landing. So 1 gold dragon can buy 210 tents? Renly touched his chin while squatting. more than 210 tents. If you buy a lot at once, the price will be cheaper. Davos shook his head, and his pale face made him look as if he had aged 10 years. And for about 4 gold dragons, we can buy a set of armor, including mail, throat guard, neck guard, and helmet. Of course, the specific price should be calculated according to the market conditions at the time. Any commodity will rise or fall. It is also necessary to consider where to buy it and the quality. For example, mail and weapons in the Iron Islands are more expensive than those in other places because of their blacksmithing skills. A blonde knight from the Southland heard the name of the Iron Islands when he passed by and couldn't help but look at them vigilantly. The other 3 northern soldiers who were gathered together and talking not far away were also attracted to their sight, but they didn't say anything. If Dawn is the eternal enemy of the Stormlands and the Reach, then the Iron Islands are the eternal enemy of the North, the Westerlands, and the Reach, because the border coastline of these places is just west of the mainland and is adjacent to the Iron Islands across the sea. The Stormlands actually have a grudge with the Iron Islands. In ancient times, the Riverlands were once ruled by the Storm King, and later it was robbed by the people of the Iron Islands. Generally speaking, the Ironborn are not welcome anywhere because their history is made up of killing and plundering. There are Stormlanders, Riverlanders, and Northerners in the team. Although most of the Northern Army is stationed at Storm's End, some are sent to escort the 2 brothers of the Baratheon family to King's Landing. The people of the Riverland are completely accompanying, and the leader, Mace Tyrell, is a Duke and Protector of the Riverland. Now he is going to King's Landing with the current team to negotiate surrender and understanding. However, the burly brown-haired nobleman did not have the attitude of a loser at the moment. He seemed not to worry about his fate after going to King's Landing, and he always talked and laughed with his knights along the way. At the moment, the guy even practiced sword leisurely with the Riverland knight on the riverbank. My lords, we don't care who is the king, but his majesty Aerys has agreed to allow us to cut trees and hunt in this forest. He has agreed, and you can't go back on your word. There was also a sound coming from another direction. The real leader of the team, Stannis, was wearing a black leather armor and standing in front of his tent. He listened to the chatter of 2 hunchbacked old farmers in linen clothes with a stern face. Of course, we will pay for raising pigs in the forest. But it was also His Majesty Aerys who allowed us to raise bees. Yes, a white-robed knight named Dane told us so in person. He also said, all the noisy things were left behind as the team continued on the road. After leaving Storm's End, they passed through the Bronze Gate City, the Wend River, and were now walking through the hunting grounds used by kings of all generations, the Royal Forest. This was a large forest. They had been walking here for 2 days. Villages and manors were occasionally seen along the way, and there were many rabbits and elks in the forest, who ran away quickly after seeing the team. But most of the time the team faced trees, brown, pale, and tender green trees. Their leaves were either sparse or dense, interweaving and dotted above the head of the forest road, casting shadows with the sun. When can we reach King's Landing? Sitting in the swaying carriage, but it didn't take long for the black-haired boy to look at Davos, who was riding on the side of the carriage. It is estimated that there is still half of the journey. Davos replied with his head tilted. Stannis didn't have many people available at the moment, so the former smuggler who had just been knighted became Renly's temporary guard. Davos didn't resist this. After the last conversation on the stairs, his resistance to Renly had basically dissipated. Then, Renly wanted to continue talking, but he saw a thin figure kneeling at the edge of the forest road in front of him from the corner of his eye, and couldn't help but look away. The northern soldiers who were leading the way seemed to have taught the little guy who was blocking the road a lesson. He looked bruised and swollen, but he still insisted on kneeling in the bushes, with his head down, and no one knew what he was doing. Unfortunately, both the Knights of the Reach and the men of the Stormlands were only concerned with walking, and all ignored his existence. Is he begging? Renly asked. He is selling himself. Davos looked at him. Disease, debt, and even hunger. The world is big, and there are always some people who can't survive. As he spoke, he carefully loosened the reins held in one hand, and touched the place where the purse was placed on his body with his movable hand, but he only touched nothing, and couldn't help but sigh helplessly. Driving a small boat to sneak into Storm's End to deliver food didn't require money, and now that the siege had just ended, he hadn't had time to replenish his personal finances. Seeing this, the black-haired boy raised his hand and handed him a gold royal through the carriage window. "This is too much." Davos shook his head hurriedly. "1 gold dragon for a life is not too much," Renly replied. Before setting off, the butler gave him 10 gold royals as expenses, but Renly still hadn't figured out what he could do with these things at his current age. "And I only have gold royals." This made Davos look at him strangely, and he asked, "Lord Renly, are you going to buy him?" Although he no longer rejected contact with him, it was still difficult for him to treat the boy in front of him as a normal child. "Why do I need a little beggar?" Renly said as he glanced at the little guy who was gradually approaching as the carriage moved forward. The other person happened to look over at this time. He looked about 7 or 8 years old, with a dirty and bruised face. His appearance was unclear, but his green eyes were more colorful and shining. However, facing Renly's gaze, the other person timidly avoided his gaze and quickly lowered his head. "I'm not buying him, just consider it a gift from me," the black-haired boy said, and went back into the carriage. After Davos looked at him deeply, he clenched the gold coins in his hand and rode closer. I thought the matter was over, but after a while, Davos, who had rushed back, spoke to Renly again. "This child is not simple," he said in a low voice. "His arms and fingers are different from those of ordinary farm children. He has obviously been trained in archery. Maybe he is the descendant of a bandit in the Kingswood Brotherhood." The Kingswood Brotherhood. It is a group of bandits who have been eliminated. 2 years ago, they were entrenched in this forest and kidnapped nobles for money. The Mad King Aerys sent troops to encircle and suppress them several times, but to no avail. In the end, he had to send Kingsgood Ser Arthur Dane and fearless Ser Barristan to lead the army. Time seemed to pass very slowly during the journey, but when the destination was about to be reached, Renly felt that the days passed very quickly. The journey was basically completed, but the life scene in Storm's End still seemed like yesterday. After the team left the Kingswood, the continuous and grey walls of King's Landing continued to expand as they approached, and a special smell gradually came over. At first, Renly thought it might be the smell of another medium, and he was a little bit excited about it. But when he got close to a certain distance, he covered his nose and rolled his eyes. "This is the stinkiest city I have ever seen." He said so to the former smuggler. However, not long after Renly officially entered King's Landing, he suddenly forgot this sentence and became quite excited. He really smelled that special smell. Thank you to the book friend Night Monkey Momo and the book friend Stupid Called Simple for the 500 reward. Chapter 29 War and Hatred. The smell came from a towering hill called Rhaenyra's Hill, which was surrounded by dense brick and stone buildings, and a ruined circular building stood on the top. The sunlight in the sky was blocked by the hill, and the shadows covered the buildings and flat streets below, slightly dispelling the stuffiness. After entering the city, a group of people were passing by here, and the unique smell unconsciously replaced the surrounding stench, attracting Renly to look at the top of the hill. He thought that the huge King's Landing might have what he wanted, but when this thing really appeared, he still couldn't help, but his heartbeat quickened. Unfortunately, the team's destination was the Red Castle deep in King's Landing. He didn't think he could leave the team at will, nor did he think that asking the team to change the route would get a positive response. So Renly just took a deep look in that direction, remembered the location, and didn't pay any more attention. The team slowly passed through the densely populated streets. In front of them was a young man wearing a golden velvet tights and a neat green cloak. He rode a horse and led the way. The servants beside him kept shouting at the pedestrians on the street to get out of the way. The people of King's Landing responded with resentment, but because there were teams of golden cloaked soldiers on both sides of the team to lead the way, they could only hide on both sides of the street and stare unwillingly. The residents here did not welcome their group of people. Renly found this out easily. He saw a middle-aged fishmonger wrapped in a headscarf on the side of the road, shouting and hawking, while staring at the team. He also saw a passing woman hugging a naked and dirty child who was wandering around, and turned around and ran away. He even saw a sloppy old beggar sitting against the wall of a brown brick house spitting in their direction. And this scene was often seen after entering the city. I heard that the Lannisters looted King's Landing before offering it to Lord Robert. Davos, who was riding a horse on the side of the carriage, explained. The Lannister family, the Lord of the West, had been choosing to wait and see when the rebellion broke out. It was not until Robert Baratheon hammered Prince Rhaegar, the heir to the Targaryen dynasty, to death with a hammer at the trident, that they decided to join the rebels. But the way they joined was very special, pretending to be royal reinforcement, tricking the gates of King's Landing open, and after the army entered the city, they immediately started burning, killing, and looting in the name of the rebel leader Robert, and finally surrendered the city. So it was obvious that the people here also regarded Baratheon as a bird of a feather. Davos's expression was a little strange when he talked about this. Renly, who saw something, asked, "Are you from King's Landing?" "I was born in Flea Bottom." While speaking, the other party unconsciously pinched a small bag hanging on his chest, which contained his 5 cut knuckles, which seemed to be regarded as some kind of comfort by him at this time. Flea Bottom is where the poor people of King's Landing gather. The noble Lord Lannister probably doesn't think much of it. He might have expected so, but when the team passed by the so-called Flea Bottom, they saw a large number of collapsed sheds and buildings, so the former smuggler didn't speak again during the rest of the journey. King's Landing is a large medieval city with a dense population and densely packed buildings. The traces of war have not yet disappeared from here. The charred ruins of the fire, the collapsed ruins of the houses, the bloodstains on the streets that have not been cleaned up, etc. Even the nearest gate, when they entered the city, before has been damaged and renovated. I don't know why the gate is broken when there is no siege. The people here are also particularly gloomy and angry, so the atmosphere of the whole city can be imagined. What I saw along the way always seemed dull and quiet, without much prosperity and noise. In addition, a fishy smell similar to that of a stinking ditch mixed with rotten meat always lingered around his nose, so Renly finally withdrew his gaze from the ancient city and hid in the carriage to think about how to get the source of the smell on the hill. This is simple. After settling down, he can just find a reason to go out and hang out, and then go up the hill. That place is a ruin. Renly guessed that there could be no one inside, so his target is likely to be an ownerless object. The initial idea was quickly finalized, but not long after, he suddenly wrinkled his nose. Is it an illusion? Or another one? The special smell that had quietly dissipated as he hurried away from the hills came back at this moment. After noticing this, Renly stuck his head out and found that they had arrived in front of a castle gate built of light red stone bricks. This is a towering castle with high walls and bronze gates, standing quietly in the depths of the city. Now its gates were open, the sharp iron gates had already been raised, and the shadows of the heavy walls covered the open space in front. Under the silent gaze of 2 rows of guards, the team entered through the entrance. As they moved forward, the strange smell became stronger, making Renly feel as if he had fallen into a treasure trove, and he had completely forgotten all his previous dislikes. However, after entering the castle, he had to get off the carriage and walk. There were many people around, and he couldn't tell where the source of the smell was for a while. He could only ignore the smell temporarily and pay attention to what was in front of him. The Red Castle. The royal castle in this city has been inhabited by the kings and royal children of the Targaryen dynasty for generations, but now it has opened its doors to the families of the rebels. However, although it is the residence of the king, it doesn't look much different from Storm's End. At most, it is more spacious, the ground is cleaner, and the courtyards and columns are more exquisite and neat. Renly lost interest. The escorting golden-robed soldiers stopped at the castle gate behind them. Other soldiers were also led to other places. Under the guidance of the guide, the few remaining people went straight along the brick road, passing several tall towers and some fortress courtyards, and finally came to a hall with an open oak door. The hall was magnificent, deep and wide, with 2 rows of carved stone pillars standing tall. Between each pillar stood noble men and women dressed in solemn and exquisite clothes. The floor of the hall was paved with checkered marble, and the surrounding walls were covered with exquisite hunting brocade. At the end of the hall, a dark, hideous black iron chair stood quietly high up. It was obviously the throne here, but it didn't look like a chair at all. Instead, it looked like a piece of iron covered with spikes, sharp horns and twisted metal. Now this iron chair was empty, and no one was sitting on it, but under the throne, 4 people of different heights and ages sat upright around a long table. After a quick glance, Renly looked directly at the sturdy young man with short black hair and a neat and handsome face. However, the hall was wide and crowded, so the other party did not notice the people at the door at the moment. He was listening quietly to the speech of a fat man in silk clothes not far away with the 3 people beside him, although he looked a little bored. This is the rule, my lords. After the owner dies, his widow must either remain a widow or marry someone in the same industry. She is absolutely not allowed to marry an outsider. My lords, she violated the rule, so our guild has the right to confiscate her late husband's shop. The person who spoke was a middle-aged blonde fat man in a light blue satin robe with a plump face. At this time, his face was full of self-righteousness. What kind of damn broken rule is this? Let me tell you, the young man under the throne opened his mouth, and a white-haired old man next to him saw this, and signaled with his eyes, so the young man snorted, and shut his mouth. Then the old man said to the petitioner expressionlessly, "We respect the rules of your guild, but whether the matter is really as you said, we still need to verify it carefully. Let's go back and wait for news." So the fat merchant bowed and left. Seeing this, the young man in the green cloak, who was waiting at the door, stepped forward and reported loudly, "Lord Robert, I'm honored to bring you Lord Stannis and your younger brother Renly, as well as Mace Tyrell, the captive of Highgarden." Before the voice fell, everyone looked over. "Thank you for the 100 rewards from the book Friends of Otaku Magic and Monster Party. I also recommend a book. I'm Louis XIV GUI's new book. You can know what it is about from the name, but it contains werewolves, witches, magic and so on. I'm looking forward to what he will write next. GUI's previous book, Servant of Servants, I have been putting it on the bookshelf to increase the word count, but it was censored 2 days ago. What a pity." Chapter 30, Not a Good Person Varys. In Renly's impression, Robert was a man who loved to joke and laugh. Except for a period of time before the war when his face was gloomy and angry, he was usually like a big fool who didn't know what distress was. Now, after the green cloak reported, the sturdy black-haired young man was also laughing. Then, ignoring the gazes of many onlookers, he stepped over and patted Stannis' shoulder hard, then squatted down and pinched Renly's face, looking very happy. It was not known whether he was happy to see his family brothers or to get rid of the tedious official duties at the moment. Finally, he looked at Mace Tyrell behind the 2 brothers and his smile faded. "Damn it, I smell the stench of roses." Robert waved to a middle-aged man in a white robe at the side of the hall and said, "Barristan, take my little brother away first, and arrange accommodation and food for him." The middle-aged man he called was wearing a neat and shiny white glazed armor. He was tall, but his face was pale, and he seemed to have suffered a lot of injuries. After hearing this, he bowed and then stepped forward with the hilt of the sword hanging on his waist. "Child, please come with me." Renly nodded, and finally glanced at Stannis, who was looking down at him quietly, and turned around, and left with the White Knight. What a good Randall Tolly, back at Ashford, if it weren't for... The voice behind him gradually faded away, and the sound of the armor and weapons colliding, when the man next to him walked, became more and more obvious. At the same time, as they walked towards the back of the King's Hall, the special smell became stronger and stronger. Renly felt very lucky to have encountered 2 clues from the medium in one day. However, he was not familiar with the people and things in the castle under his feet, and he could not determine the specific location of the smell at the moment. So he looked at the white-robed knight beside him. Looking closely, the middle-aged man named Barristan had a handsome face, but looked a little old. His brown hair was mixed with a few silver-white strands, and narrow wrinkles overflowed on both sides of his deep eye sockets. His face was pale and weak, and he coughed from time to time as he moved. Only his blue eyes were quite shining, and with his handsome white enamel armor and white cloak, he looked younger than his actual age. "Are you the legendary Ser Barristan?" This man kept silent while walking, as if he was worried about something, so Renly opened the conversation. Fearless Barristan, he had heard of this name both in his previous life and in the present. He sneaked into the rebellious town alone to rescue the captured king, and killed the last heir of the Blackfy family in the war, ending the long-lasting division that had plagued the Targaryen dynasty for nearly 100 years. The most recent time was on the way to King's Landing, when Davos told him about the annihilation of the Kingsguard Brotherhood, and one of the leaders was this man in front of him. He is one of the 7 Kingsguard who protects the king, and a great knight with many great achievements. Although he was born in the Stormlands, he fought for the Targaryens in the past. Now it seems that he has surrendered to Baratheon. Barristan Selmy, Sir Lionel Selmy of Harvest Hall is my father. The White Knight nodded in response to Renly's question, and looked down at him with a complicated look, as if he was rejected, but also quite painful. This emotion made Renly very strange, but he did not want to explore it. Instead, he said according to his own thoughts, they all said that there are dragon bones decorated in the King's Hall. Why didn't I see it? Because Lord Robert hates everything related to dragons. He asked people to collect the bones in the throne room. Barristan replied while coughing, they are now stored in the cellar. Can I go and see? Renly asked impatiently. He had never been to King's Landing, and his memories of his previous life did not have much impression of this place, but as he just said, he had heard that the King's Hall was full of dragon skeletons of the Targaryen family. The medium he could smell did not seem to be an ordinary item. At first, it was the false teeth, and then the dagger of the Cranberry Man. Now in this red castle, he could not think of anything more special than dragon bones. My mission is to place you properly. The White Knight shook his head and denied. If you want to see, child, you can discuss it with your brother Robert in the future. Renly frowned when he heard this. I just want to take a look. No. Why not? Lord Robert's orders are for me to settle you down, not to take you to see the dragon bones. Are all the Kingsguard so inflexible? No, child, we just need to strictly follow orders. Renly blinked and changed the subject. My elder brother asked you to arrange accommodation for me. The boy said thoughtfully, but he didn't say that I can't see the castle, right? He didn't order me to do so. Yes, he didn't say that. Renly frowned and said, so is there anything wrong with me wanting to take a look at the surrounding environment? Did Robert bring his little brother all the way to King's Landing, just to put him in confinement? The white-robed knight looked at the black-haired boy in surprise and hesitated. But Lord Robert's orders are my elder brother is very good to me. He can't possibly put me in confinement. Renly interrupted the other party with a pretentious look, and then looked at the knight next to him with a sudden realization. Sir, you don't look well. Are you injured? Are you seriously injured? Yes, I was injured on the battlefield. Barristan answered without thinking. He realized what he was saying, and his old face suddenly turned red. Child, don't get me wrong. I'm not injured, it's okay, sir. I understand. Let's go quickly, and then you can go back and have a good rest. The boy's words sounded very sensible, but it made the other party more embarrassed. So after hesitating for a moment, he said, come with me. I'll take you to the cellar, and then we'll go to Meagher's Holdfast, where your accommodation will be arranged. Really? Come with me. Are you sure you're okay? Thank you for your kindness, child, but I'm very sure of this. Renly said when he heard it. So the route that was originally going straight into the castle turned into a bend. The tall white-robed knight led a black-haired boy towards a certain part of the castle. The ground of this castle was paved with red bricks, and the area was very large. The towers were taller than the other, and the courtyard of the fortress was full of people. A large number of servants were in a hurry, and shuttled through the pillars and corridors in various places. After walking for a while, Renly felt that he was a little confused. The White Knight was obviously famous in the castle. There were always people greeting him along the way, including the old washerwoman holding a pile of clothes, the kitchen boy fetching water, the well-dressed young lady, and the young servant who was washing the mail for the night. They even saw a bald sissy in a pink robe. The sissy wore a pair of soft slippers and a bright robe made of silk. He had a round face and fat, and his body was full of the fragrance of powder. The voice of greeting was also soft and gentle. After hearing the voice, Renly looked at his lower body unconsciously, but the other party quickly pulled the robe to cover it, and then glared at him with a look of reproach. A good child won't have a pair of thieving eyes that look around. Pretty boy. Renly rolled his eyes at this, but the other party chuckled when he saw it, then turned around and walked away. This guy is quite interesting, the boy thought, and after taking a last glance at the fat bald head, he signaled the White Knight who was waiting for him to stop and continue on his way. That's Varys, the chief of intelligence. We call him the octopus spider. After walking away, Barristan frowned and warned Renly, he is both cunning and, I mean, this guy's not a good person, child. You'd better stay away from him. Because he raises spiders? That, you can say that, so it's very dangerous. During the conversation, the White Knight took the boy to a hall that looked a little desolate. After taking down a burning torch on the wall, he squatted down and opened a fan-shaped wooden entrance in the corner, then turned to the boy and said, "This is the cellar, child. The dragon bone you want to see is down there." Renly nodded, and the rich smell lingering between his nostrils made him happy. Obviously he was not wrong. I update very quickly. From the time the book was published to now, I have an average of 6,000 pages per day. It cannot be compared with those books that have 3 or 4 updates after they are put on the shelves. But for books, before they are put on the shelves, this amount of updates is not small. Chapter 31 Entering again. The entrance to the cellar was narrow for the White Knight, but Renly had no problem getting through. After arriving, they walked in one after the other, stepping on the rock steps and going deeper and deeper. Soon, a chilly feeling came over them, and goosebumps appeared on their arms. After entering the cellar, the environment became very dim. The White Knight walked in front with a torch in his hand. There was light coming from the fan-shaped entrance behind him, but it became less and less as they walked forward, and finally disappeared completely as the two of them walked down the stairs. As they continued to move forward, the special smell became stronger and stronger, covering all other smells in the place. The orange flame burned at the top of the torch, casting a narrow shadow behind the knight. A bright black flashed from the corner of their eyes as they walked forward, but it quickly dimmed as the fire left. It was a skull the size of a puppy's bone, loosely lying on the outer edge of the cellar. Renly glanced at it curiously, and then his attention was attracted by the larger dragon bone in front. The torchlight was dim, but it could still clearly illuminate the surrounding area. Along with the crisp sound of armor colliding and footsteps on the knights, more and more skeletons were seen. Hound-sized, calf-sized, horse-sized, bison-sized, and even dragon-sized. The dark skulls were one after another, each taller and larger than the other. The deepest one was even as high as a dome, and it seemed that the cellar could no longer accommodate them. Looking closely, the eye sockets of the skull were hollow and deep, and the sharp teeth were like long pillars standing there. The firelight shone on them, as if the surface of the dark bones was coated with a layer of flame-cast film, which kept flickering as the fire burned. The largest one is Balerion, the Black Death. The White Knight said, Aegon the Conqueror rode this dragon to bring Westeros into his kingdom. No voice responded to him. In the dim environment, the black-haired boy was quietly looking up at the behemoth in front of him, as if he was looking at some miracle. Although he had long known that the world he was reincarnated into was a place full of mystery and fantasy, and although he had the ability to travel through history and had seen another kind of huge remains, but when a dragon's skull, a legendary, huge creature's remains that was obviously beyond his cognition, appeared before his eyes, he was still surprised. At this moment, he briefly ignored the strange fragrance that tempted him and stared at the huge dragon skull that seemed to move faintly with the flickering firelight and was full of curiosity about its true appearance. But in fact, his target was not this largest skull, but the second largest skull next to it. It seemed that the black head was just a little smaller and the mouth was longer, but unlike the other skulls, the special fragrance emanated from its surface. After a few glances, Renly retracted his gaze and said to the White Knight beside him, "Let's go, sir. Thank you for bringing me here." The knight was a little surprised that he was ready to leave like this. He thought the little guy would stay here for a while. After all, most children who saw dragon bones for the first time were either frightened and cried or aroused strong curiosity and then couldn't wait to ask questions or go to study them themselves. Secretly amazed, the White Knight didn't say much nonsense, just nodded, and then turned around and walked away. The atmosphere became silent. On the way back, Renly kept thinking about the dragon bones, and didn't want to speak again. Although he was shocked by the skull before, it didn't make Renly lose his mind. Although the second largest skull was the source of the smell, he would not use his special methods in front of others. After entering that kind of copy, his real body seemed to fall into a coma. It was nothing simple, but he was not sure what would happen if he separated himself from the medium that entered the copy during this period. And if he really fainted here, the person next to him would never wait for him to finish before talking, and even if he could wait, it would obviously be inappropriate for outsiders to see this phenomenon. We still have to think about how to prevent others from finding out. Thinking about this question, Renly finally stepped into a square fortress in the castle that was protected by a dry moat. The next period of time was quiet and noisy. It seemed that, since Renly and his team arrived, the banquets in the Red Castle had never stopped. Every night, a warm and noisy grand dinner would be held in the throne room of the castle. There were many participants in the dinner, and singers and jugglers performed one after another. The Lannisters in the west, the Tullys in the Riverlands, the Arryns in the Vale, and even the newly surrendered Tyrell family in the River Bay. Many big families now have people in King's Landing, and their subordinates are also numerous. There is an endless stream of nobles walking inside and outside the Red Castle, as if all the lords and nobles in Westeros have arrived here recently. There is only one reason the new king is about to be crowned. In fact, if it weren't for the need to wait for the return of Eddard Stark, the Duke of the North, the coronation ceremony of the king would have started long ago. After all, a country cannot be without a ruler, and if it is delayed for a long time, it is inevitable that something unexpected will happen. But all this has nothing to do with Renly. For now, he only needs to pretend to be a polite child. In the morning, he had breakfast with Stannis, Robert, and a Duke of the Vale named Jon Arryn. In the evening, he was taken to a banquet. During this period, ladies from all over the country would point fingers at him every now and then, and children of the same age would come to play with him. He even met several people whose appearances were very different from his impressions. Jaime Lannister looked only 17 or 18 years old at this time. He was wearing a white robe of the King's Guard, had dazzling golden hair, and smiled handsomely, but seemed a little arrogant. Tywin Lannister, Jaime's father and the Duke of the West, was one of the top nobles in the Seven Kingdoms. He was taciturn but full of dignity. Every time he appeared, he was surrounded by some guys with golden hair. Renly heard that there were several brothers of Duke Tywin. However, although the Lannister family looked powerful, they were not well received at the moment. Every time they appeared, others would retreat and dodge, and then point fingers. So Renly rarely saw these people. In addition, he also met Lysa Tully, the new wife of Jon Arryn, the old Duke of the Valley. This mean woman with a pointed chin in his impression seemed to have a round face at this time. She was slender, cute, and had beautiful long red hair. She was only 17 or 18 years old, but she sat next to an old man who was nearly 60 years old. No matter how you looked at her, they looked like a grandfather and grandson, not even a father and daughter, but they were husband and wife. She seemed to have a good personality. She always liked to smile at Renly during meals, and she looked very shy when she smiled. But Renly felt that the way she looked at him was a little strange, as if full of sadness. And this man's sister, Catelyn, the wife of the Duke of the North, Eddard Stark, has not come to King's Landing yet. It is said that she has just given birth to a baby boy and cannot travel long distances. Apart from these few people, Renly has basically no impression of the others, and he did not pay much attention to them. Relatively speaking, Renly prefers the food in the banquet. The lifelike cream swan tastes sweet and fragrant, but it is not as attractive as the real swan meat. After tasting the food similar to goose meat, Renly is more curious about the roasted bear meat with rich sauce. In addition, the tender butter-baked quail, crispy fried trout, honey pie, snail soup, roasted capon with the belly hollowed out and filled with spices. The world was occupied by all kinds of delicacies for a while, making Renly seem to have suddenly awakened some unique hobby. Every day, his belly was round and his mouth was full of oil. After finishing, he went back to his room and lay down on the bed and began to sleep. Not long after, he felt that he had gained a lot of weight. He basically spent the morning and evening eating. The rest of the time he did not hide in his room, but took the family guards assigned by Robert to find Barristan, the King's Guard. He said he admired the other party's legends and achievements, but in fact he was familiar with the route and prepared to go into the cellar at any opportunity. And this opportunity came not long ago. During a stroll, Renly took advantage of the time when two guards were attacked by a mad black cat. turned around and quietly disappeared behind the wall of a building corner, and then quickly moved forward in a direction that he was already very familiar with. Soon after, he heard shouting and hurried footsteps behind him, but the sound was heading in another direction he was used to walking, and he did not notice where he was. Renly was completely relieved, and then hurriedly set off along the wall towards his destination. A short and fat fortress, a solemn sanctuary, a ruined semicircular tower, an uninhabited courtyard. Carefully avoiding everyone on the road, he finally came to the abandoned hall he had arrived at not long ago, then struggled to open the heavy fan-shaped wooden door, and stepped down into the cellar. Dark, gloomy, and cold, the cellar environment remained the same, but the boy was not protected by the light of a torch at this time, so at first there was nothing in front of him, and he could not see anything. After adapting a little at the door, his vision slowly recovered, but it was also quite blurry. But this was enough. Carefully moving forward in the dark, stepping on small steps past one strange corpse with empty eyes after another, he finally arrived in front of his goal. Looking up, the deep eye sockets of the dragon skull were both empty and weird, and it seemed that there were really two eyeballs staring at the black-haired boy in front of him, which made him unconsciously get goosebumps and feel a little creepy. After rubbing his arms, Renly took a deep breath, then dived into the open mouth of the dragon skull, sat slumped in it, stretched his legs, and tightly grasped the hideous black teeth in front of him that were taller than him. A warm yet cold strange touch emerged, but Renly did not have much time to feel it. As he exerted force with his hands, his originally clear thinking quickly blurred and diverged. The surrounding environment also became darker, and finally turned completely black. Thank you to the book friends Phantom Zedwing for the reward of 1000. Thank you to the book friends Long Sheng Yun Zhao and Xianatang 246 for the reward of 600. Thank you to the book friends Passabier and Q Model Domination P for the reward of 500. Thank you to the book friends Monster Party and Tay Wu Zhen Ren for the reward of 100. Chapter 32. The Fallen Dragon. Hot, scorching and blazing. The heat, as if the flames were close to his skin, surged from all around and quickly awakened Renly, who was in a hazy state. After opening his eyes, he found himself lying face down on a gravel-covered sandy ground, with flames shooting up from all directions. There was a collapsed wall on the side, and now he was being pressed down by a pile of yellow bricks. There was a sharp pain in his forehead, and there was also a burning pain in his right arm and legs. Not far away, a pool of sticky blood was slightly illuminated by the surrounding firelight. 3 lines of strange words emerged from the concave surface of the pool of blood as Renly watched. Save Rhaenys Targaryen. Survive for 30 days. Escort Rhaenys Targaryen safely to the hands of Aegon the Conqueror. The air was filled with a burning feeling, and all the buildings in sight were burning with raging fires, and many hazy figures shuffled in and out of the buildings. There were chaotic footsteps, panicked screams and loud shouts, and faint sounds of arrows breaking through the air. The situation seemed to be full of danger. There was no time to think carefully about these 3 lines. Renly immediately prepared to get up from the ground. However, just as he stood up, he suddenly felt a violent impact on the back of his head. The huge force brought a sharp pain. After an unconscious groan, Renly fell back to the ground. He thought it was an enemy attacking him, but what he saw was a figure running past. It was a soldier wearing a helmet, wearing brown leather armor, holding a spear and a shield in both hands. It seemed that it was the shield that knocked him down just now. It didn't seem to be an enemy, but before Renly could think about why he was hit, a dazzling silver-red fire column in front of him suddenly fell from the sky, directly submerging the running soldier, and the heat wave spread, and even the walls of the surrounding buildings that were still intact were all collapsed by the impact of this strange fire column. The silver fire that fell from the sky made everything in front of him extremely blinding, but the flames did not stay in place, but swept towards the tall tower buildings in the deeper direction like a thick high-pressure water gun. However, water can bring coolness, but fire can only make people scream and step into the abyss of hell. Wailing and screaming, cursing, and shouting, accompanied by the silver-red flames surging forward, this castle covered with yellow sand was split into like a piece of cake. Renly felt that he was lucky because the flames were gushing in the opposite direction of him, but he did not relax because of this, but became more nervous. The situation around him was full of dangers. To his left was a burning stable, and behind him was a group of towers and low houses. Not far ahead was a rock wall, and now some soldiers on the wall were all screaming and running around because of the fire. Standing up from the broken wall with difficulty, Renly wanted to find a safe place to hide and calm down, but when he looked around, he saw flames everywhere. There was no secret place for him to hide. It seemed that the safest place was under the ruins where he was. A roaring sound floated from the sky in the distance. Renly looked up and saw a huge silver figure with wings spread out, flying around the castle in the sky. From time to time, it flew low and sprayed out a blazing silver red fire. The walls and towers here were boiled by the flames, and the people in them were forced to wait for death like ants in boiling water. Renly was one of the ants. Rhaenys Targaryen. This name flashed through his mind. He had not studied the history of Westeros for a long time, but he knew at least 3 people referred to by this name. However, in combination with the style of the surrounding buildings and the emblems and flags, the soaring dragon in the sky, and a certain task he had just seen, Renly quickly learned who the dragon rider above him was, and what the current situation was. After Aegon Targaryen, who was born on Dragonstone, and his 2 queens landed in what would later be called King's Landing, they officially began their road to conquest, burning Harrenhal, invading the Stormlands, and setting a raging fire on a fertile plain in the Reach, burning the royal Gardner family of the Reach and many of their descendants to death, and also conquering the then king of the Lannister family in the west. The king of the north, who marched southward, knelt down and surrendered when he saw the bad situation, and the Vale also offered the crown with a smile after the arrival of the Queen's dragon. Among the 7 ancient kingdoms, only Dorne did not surrender to the little Queen's dragon, and the lords chose to abandon the castles in various places and hide in the vast desert. In the first year of the conquest, Aegon was crowned king in Old Town, and then he was busy pacifying the chaos in all directions, and ignored Dorne, who had not yet surrendered. But this disregard was only temporary. In the 4th year of the conquest, Aegon officially launched the First Dorne Conquest War, but was defeated by the enemy's guerrilla tactics, and withdrew his troops. In the 7th year of the conquest, Aegon and his little queen rode dragons to burn castles in Dorne. The Dornishmen launched a crazy revenge, and began to avoid the dragons, while counterattacking the borders of the Reach and Stormlands bordering Dorne. As time went by, hatred quickly heated up. The fall of Rhaenys Targaryen raised the anger of hatred to another level. When burning a castle called Hellgate, the dragon ridden by the Conqueror's little queen was unfortunately shot in the eye by a crossbow, so the dragon and the dragon rider both died on the ancient land of Dorne. The lord family living in Hellgate is called Ulla. Their family emblem is a staggered flame of yellow and crimson. At this moment, there is a tattered flag that has been burned for the most part on the city wall. So Renly was sure that he was in Hellgate, so he guessed that the one burning the castle above his head was Aegon the Conqueror's sister and little queen, one of the founders of the Targaryen dynasty, Rhaenys Targaryen. And he was currently in this historical event, that is, he had come to the era when the Targaryen dynasty was just established more than 200 years ago. If the historical records were correct, he would then witness the tragic fall of the majestic dragon rider in the sky. The premise is that he was not burned to death by the other party first. If you want me to save her, why don't you let me go first? In the chaotic and noisy environment, a young man with messy black short hair leaned over and hid at the base of the ruins and muttered, then looked down at his current situation. The surface of his brown black leather armor was covered with burnt spots, his rough and thin linen trousers were worn out in several places, and the sleeves of his left arm that were burned by the flames were mixed with muddy blood, causing sharp pains. The only consolation was that he had a sheathed dagger on his back. But what use was this dagger in the face of the dragon's flames? His mind was racing, and he couldn't help but scan the surrounding walls. According to historical records, the dragon Melaxis, ridden by the little queen, was shot to death by a ballista, so if the ballista here was destroyed in advance, wouldn't there be nothing wrong? However, he soon discovered that there were no ballistas on the wall not far away, only a few corpses burning with blazing flames and the ruins of wooden equipment dotted on the top of the city. This made him hesitate for a moment, but considering that, if he didn't act now, the mission might be forced to fail in a while, He gritted his teeth unconsciously, then rushed out and quickly ran to the end of the road behind the ruins wall, which was covered with flames, and rushed towards a tall tower on the left side of the castle. He was going to find a bow, then stand in a safe and high place, to launch an attack and shoot the soldiers operating the crossbows in the castle one by one, and then naturally complete the mission. The tall tower at the end of the site is quite suitable, although the surrounding flames are aging. It does not seem to be able to completely dissolve the stone. Unfortunately, in the chaos, before he could reach his destination, a painful and terrifying dragon roar suddenly came from above his head. Renly, who was in the shadow of the burning wall, looked up at the sound, and a huge shadow falling rapidly in the sky immediately came into view, and it became bigger and bigger in his pupils. Thank you to the book friend Sanki and Mengi for the 500 reward. Chapter 33, The Fallen Dragon. Under the dim sky, the huge figure that kept ascending was like a silver meteor. The shrill screams that broke through the air were endless. The huge wings flapped chaotically, and the wind and flames were very fierce, but it could not hide the trend of falling. So finally, with a loud bang, the whole dragon landed with difficulty on the scorched earth not far from the city wall. The earth trembled, and the storm and sandstorms rushed around, forcing the surrounding buildings to bend down due to the blazing flames. The hard earth's surface was instantly torn and sunken, and a nearby masonry wall was also affected by the dragon's tail and collapsed. The fierce impact made the dragon's screams more sharp and painful. As its neck struggled and swung, the huge mouth full of hideous black teeth quickly spewed out a dazzling silver-red column of fire that swept around. The purgatory of fire was even hotter. Renly rushed behind a ruined wall and looked up at the silver flames above his head. He was sweating, and his heartbeat became very intense. The place where the dragon's tail fell was where he had just stood. At this time, there were roads and buildings on fire in front, behind, left and right, and the wall behind him was getting hotter and hotter. But the flames from above were quietly subsided after a while. After taking a deep breath of the hot air, Renly carefully looked over. On the scorched earth below the wall, a giant dragon covered with silver scales was crawling there and convulsing in pain. Its wings spread on the ground were like two trembling silver lakes, and its long and narrow tail was winding and stretched, covered with sharp spikes. The dragon had a long neck and a ferocious head, but it also had a unique beauty. Renly saw that the eye facing him was deeply pierced with a bloody crossbow arrow, which was the source of the dragon's fall and severe injury. However, despite the terrifying cry, the dragon did not move, but lay there quietly and wailed. Renly saw his target on its neck. It was a figure wearing silver female armor sitting on a special dragon saddle. The helmet that should have been worn on her head was thrown out at some point. Her long silver gold curly hair was scattered, and with her head drooping, chaos covered her face. She seemed to have fallen into a coma due to the impact, but because of the saddle straps tied around her body, she was not thrown out. Renly narrowed his eyes when he saw this, but did not act rashly. At the same time, Renly was not the only one who discovered the situation of the dragon and the dragon rider here, or rather, as the party that shot the dragon, this ruined castle with dense flames reacted quickly. A team of soldiers in leather armor were approaching cautiously. The soldiers in front held copper shields, and the ones behind held bows and spears tightly in their hands. However, before they could draw their bows and shoot arrows, the dragon, which originally looked listless, suddenly raised its head and roared, its voice full of anger and pain. At the same time, its body struggled to move and trembled, and a silver-red flame suddenly gushed out of its high-raised dragon mouth. The flames were released into the sky, but the large sparks that were slashed down diagonally were like a bright rainstorm, completely drowning the team of soldiers on the spot. Painful screams rang out instantly, and the soldiers hurriedly covered their faces and fled around, but they could not hide the blazing fire on their bodies, and their screams became even more shrill. Only one guy at the back saw that the situation was not good, and hid behind the wall next to him. The screams of the Dornish soldiers seemed to have stimulated the weak dragon even more. It kept hissing loudly, and its fat silver-scaled body struggled to crawl towards the source of the sound. Its narrow tail swept everything around it violently, and the continuous rumbling made the place even more chaotic. But there was also a chance. As the dragon crawled forward, the surrounding buildings collapsed and shattered, but just as the narrow tail of the silver dragon swept a ruined wall, a black shadow quickly jumped out of it, lay down to avoid the back-sweeping dragon tail, and then stepped up suddenly, then quickly stepped on the broken dragon wing, and ran towards the dragon's neck. The dragon scales were thick, but smooth. At the same time, the dragon was constantly moving its wings in order to move forward, so the black shadow standing on it was not stable and almost fell several times. But fortunately, during this process, the dragon did not turn around and spit fire, but kept roaring and screaming forward. So the shadow finally approached the knight at the base of the dragon's neck. The chaotic and dazzling firelight mixed with screams in the distance was full of a doomsday atmosphere. In the bright night, Renly, with blood and sweat on his forehead, gritted his teeth and pulled open the buckle on the saddle. With a dagger in his hand, he quickly cut the belt tied between the saddle and the body of the silver-haired dragon knight, then pulled it off, jumped off the dragon and ran away. Perhaps sensing the departure of its master, the dragon roared and stretched its neck over to bite, but this seemed to affect its eye injury, and even the sharp hissing turned into a wail. But a dazzling silver-red dragon flame was still brewing in the depths of its wide-open mouth, but in the end it did not really launch this attack, but after a whine, turned around and continued to struggle and crawl forward. At this time, Renly was holding the heavy dragon knight and hiding behind a half-collapsed wall, panting heavily. The rumbling collision and roaring outside were clearly audible, but gradually faded away. From the corner of his eyes, he could see the rumbling sound of a burning tower being hit not far away, and the edge of the city wall became shaky after several impacts. Renly, who had barely escaped, heard some noises, and turned his head to see that someone had actually rushed over from nowhere. "Well done, boy. We actually caught the wife of that bastard Egan." Ha! The man laughed and grabbed the long hair of the person in Renly's arms, his dark and rough face full of excitement and hatred, but then his laughter stopped abruptly. Under the firelight, the flash of a dagger quickly cut the other person's swollen throat. With his eyes wide open, blood splattered from the wound on his neck, but it could only splash on the sandy ground in front of him. The black-haired young man had already jumped up at this time and pulled off the yellow silk cloak draped around the other person's waist and wrapped it around the woman in his arms, then ignored the dying person who was holding his throat and screaming, gritted his teeth, and ran quickly towards the smoky city gate. There was no one on the road, only burning buildings and charred corpses. But when Renly ran to the city gate, he found a team of 5 spear guards gathered there, looking into the depths of the burning castle. He hesitated for a moment, but when those people looked over, Renly's face turned anxious and irritable. "Get out of the way, my lord is burned. I'm going to the moat to find water, you guys get out of the way. The well behind the kitchen is closer," a Dornish soldier hurriedly said when he heard it. "The dragon is over there. Do you want my lord to die?" The black-haired young man cursed, his feet moving as fast as his heart beat. "There are people behind who are seriously injured. You guys go help. Our mission is to guard here," someone answered, and another person hurriedly asked, "What's going on in the castle now? Did we succeed?" "Let's talk about it later. Saving people is the most important thing." So the soldiers at the city gate hurriedly got out of the way. Then they saw the black-haired companion holding his master and leaping into the muddy moat without hesitation. The waves splashed violently, and the figure was swallowed up and disappeared in an instant. "Why did he jump?" A soldier with a spear frowned. "We don't have a bucket," another person explained consciously, obviously not thinking that the black-haired companion was a traitor. However, when the other party's figure did not appear in the flowing river for a long time, even a fool could feel that something seemed to be wrong. So the gatekeepers looked at each other, held their spears, and moved closer along the drawbridge, ready to find out the situation. Coincidentally, there was an angry roar from the castle at this time, so their bodies froze. "There is a traitor. Lord Dulla has been killed. Egan's dragon bitch has also been rescued. Thank you to book friends Sanki and Mengi, and for their respective rewards of 500 yuan, and thank you to book friends Kum and Chengli for their respective rewards of 100 yuan. Chapter 34, The Fallen Dragon. The footsteps on the yellow sand riverbank were hurried and continuous. Teams of Dornish soldiers, in black and yellow scale armor, were running quickly along the turbulent river under the bright full moon in the sky. They were carrying spears and shields, with anger and anxiety on their faces. In the distance behind them was a ruined castle with blazing black smoke and flames. The castle was close to the riverbank. Figures appeared one after another inside and rushed in all directions. So it wasn't long before many Dornish riders on horses appeared on the border of the distant desert, and then they took action around the castle. The desert climate was cold at night, and even breathing began to emit cold air, but the scene of the bustling voices was very hot. In the dim night, shouts in the common language of Westeros with a Dornish accent continued. Countless figures approached from all directions, and finally gathered on both sides of a river called the Sulphur River to search carefully, not letting go of a single bit of land. The Dornishmen who came from afar seemed endless, and soon the entire riverbank had been thoroughly searched. There were also small boats passing by in the river. More people dispersed with the river as the center point, searching deep in the desert in the 4 directions of southeast, northwest and northwest. Unfortunately, when the heat dispelled the cold and the sun rose slowly the next day, the Dornishmen had not gained anything. The people who searched were very unwilling to accept this, but they did not doubt that they did not find the target because of their improper search. Instead, they thought that there were more traitors who secretly hid the people or had already moved away. So the angry Dornishmen set their sights farther away and also looked at their own camp, which they had been very relieved about. After hundreds of casualties, they finally shot a dragon to death, but a traitor appeared on their side and rescued the little queen. They could not calm their anger, nor could they not doubt that the Dornishmen, who were originally thought to be solid, were still so trustworthy. Unfortunately, the direction they thought was normal was actually not correct, and the place they had searched thoroughly could not be called a complete search at all. When the noise subsided, and the Dornishmen on both sides of the river changed their direction and disappeared, a head suddenly broke out from under a large rock in the wide river, watched for a while, and quickly climbed ashore. This was a very strange combination. It seemed that they had been lurking in the river for a long time, but one of the women with silver curly hair was still unconscious at this time. However, the slightly rising and falling chest silently revealed that she was not drowned. The other person was a handsome young man with short black hair, a hooked nose and thin lips. His skin tanned by the scorching sun and slightly exotic appearance made him look like a real Dornishman, but the real situation was obviously different from what he saw. There were raised loess hills all around on both sides, and the surging river water beside him made a series of surging noises. The wounds on his forehead and other parts of his body no longer felt stinging, because they had been soaked in the river water for a long time, but the linen bandages had been soaked into deep red by blood. Looking up at the increasingly dazzling sun in the sky, Renly frowned unconsciously, and then looked at the woman lying on the lowest surface in front of him. This little queen named Rhaenys Targaryen should be in her 30s, but she looked like she was in her 20s. The silver scale armor she was wearing had been removed and discarded because it was too heavy underwater, so she was now wrapped in only the yellow cashmere cloak that Renly had robbed before, as well as the black padded leather armor jacket and the silk shirt and trousers inside. She had a head of silver gold curly long hair, which was now quietly spread on the ground, covered with silt and debris from the river. Her face also looked very dirty, but this did not hide her beauty. With a high nose bridge and a smooth forehead, the Valyrians are known for their dragon taming and handsomeness, and the woman in front of him also has that unique beauty. However, after squatting down and taking a few glances, the black-haired young man quickly pulled out the silver dagger in the leather sheath on his waist, grabbed the other person's beautiful long hair, and started cutting it. The dagger was not particularly sharp, but human hair was more fragile. Bunches of beautiful long hair that shone in the sun were cut off and thrown into the river behind him. Finally, when the black-haired young man took back the dagger, the beautiful woman who originally had shiny silver gold curly hair had now become a woman with a strange short hair. Admiring his masterpiece, the black-haired young man nodded with satisfaction, and then suddenly thought of something, raised his hand, and touched his chest, but did not touch any ring-like items. Then he looked down at his hand and did not see anything special. Renly frowned unconsciously. The situation was tense at the time. Originally, he jumped into the moat just to swim away from the bottom and escape from the sight of the Dornishmen guarding the gate. However, he didn't expect that once he entered the water, the mermaid's breath ability that he thought he couldn't bring in would work. Not only that, the moat was connected to the larger river full of sulfur, so things became much easier. Facing the endless search of the Dornishman, he simply hid in the river with the woman he had rescued. He would dive into the water when someone passed by, and surface when no one was around, hiding in the shadow under the stone in the river. He basically did this all night. Thinking about it, he unconsciously glanced at the other person's rosy lips, but then raised his eyes and scanned the surroundings vigilantly. At this time, the sun was high in the sky, and the river under the scorching sun was rising with thick water vapor. The sand and stones on both sides were dry and hot. Beyond the lowest hills was an endless desert and hills. There was a high hill behind him, so the castle called Hellgate was not visible. But Renly didn't think he had drifted far, so after a short rest to relieve the cold, he carried the unconscious man on his back and fled in the opposite direction. It was an impossible task to escape from the encirclement of the Dornish, but if he considered the identity of the man he was carrying, Renly felt that he only needed to hold on for a while and then wait for a rescue. However, where to hide was a problem. There had to be water and food, otherwise, even if they were not found by the Dornish, they would probably starve to death. Renly didn't know much about the geography of Dorne, but he didn't have to worry too much about food for the time being. After all, there was a river next to him. Although the water in the river was a little turbid, it was not difficult to find some food from it. He was thinking about another question at this time. I don't know how to save him, wake him up. Among the 3 tasks, he felt that he had completed one at the risk of his life, but there had been no reward since last night, which made him a little puzzled. However, this did not affect his actions. Although he hoped for rescue, this place was too close to the Dornish castle. He could not hide in the river all the time, and it was impossible to find some hidden places that even the locals did not know about. So he rushed downstream along the river with the target on his back, and decided to get away from this place first. At the edge of the river filled with yellow sand, the figure carrying the woman on his back slowly moved forward. As he continued to move forward, the sun rose higher and higher, and the light it emitted became hotter and hotter. The thick leather armor and shirt and trousers on his body, which were originally wet, became dry and pleasant, and then became dry. The woman on his back made him feel even more uncomfortable. The padded leather coat on the other person seemed to have become a stove at this time, constantly emitting a stuffy breath towards him. This thing is indispensable when wearing armor, but now it seems a bit cumbersome. However, despite this, he did not take off the thick coat, like he took off the armor, but reluctantly injured it. When he could not bear it anymore, he temporarily stopped moving, and rushed into the river next to him to relieve the heat. Perhaps his attention was focused elsewhere. He didn't encounter many benefactors along the way, nor did he see any changes in the environment, as if this river and this desert wilderness were endless. A day passed quietly, and when night fell, the thick coat that was previously a burden became an important item for keeping warm. Under the dim moonlight, Renly, who was tired from walking, shivered and sat down on the yellow earth on the riverbank. He stared at the bloated woman lying in front of him, and always felt that the yellow cloak she was wearing was a bit redundant. But before he could consider whether he should pull this thing out and wrap it around himself, he suddenly found that one of the other's fingers lying on the ground moved slightly. Renly was startled by this, but before he could observe carefully, a message flashed in his mind. You have acquired a new skill, poison making LV5. Thank you for the 100 rewards from the book Friend of What Is Love, and thank you for your recommendation votes. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 35, The Fallen Dragon. Poison collection, processing, poison identification. Endless memories emerged in his mind, and when everything finally settled, Renly suddenly felt like he had unveiled the world. He looked around and saw that the grey rock not far away seemed to be no different from the others, but now he saw that there were probably some Dornish red scorpions carrying poison. The grass growing under his feet was actually covered with special paralysis toxins, and the skin would be directly infected if it touched. Less than 5 meters away from him, on the sandy ground that looked ordinary, there was actually a poisonous sand snake that blended in with the surroundings, crawling on the ground, staring at the two of them. He broke out in a cold sweat. He squatted down and picked up a stone. After weighing it, he threw it out. The sand snake quickly raised its head, but was hit on the forehead by the stone, making a hissing sound. The whole snake began to curl and twist, and was finally cut off by Renly's dagger. The snake's blood flowed in the sand, and continued to seep down. After a sigh of relief, Renly turned around, and prepared to pick up the target of the mission and leave this place full of poisons. However, when he turned around, he faced a woman who stood up, and stared at him. "Who are you?" Under the cool moonlight, the white-skinned purple-eyed woman was full of vigilance, especially when she found out that Renly looked like a Dornishman. She couldn't help but kick her legs and backed away in panic. With her slender body, she didn't look as domineering as she did when she burned Hellgate last night. "Save your people," Renly said as he put his dagger back into the sheath to show that he had no hostility, which really made the other party feel a little relieved. "Save me, you," she murmured, scanning the surrounding situation, but suddenly felt something was wrong, so she couldn't help but raise her hand and touch the top of her head. "Where is my hair?" The hoarse voice suddenly became sharp, and the nervous little queen didn't care about being afraid at this time, and stared at Renly with anger on her face. "Did you cut my hair? Most of your hair was burned by the fire, so I helped you trim it, and I think it's better for us," Renly said as he pointed to the cloak on the other person. "Wrap it around your head, and you'll look like a Dornish woman." This was actually something he said casually. In fact, Renly had never seen how Dornish women dressed, but she was stunned after hearing it. Her angry face turned into a look of half understanding. Finally, she hurriedly pulled up the cloak and wrapped it around her head, which looked a little funny for a moment. "I'm sorry, sir, I misunderstood you," she said politely, and then hesitated to say, "Excuse me, my dragon. Dead." Renly shrugged. It was shot in the eye by a crossbow, and then fell into the Dornish lair. After saying that, seeing that the other party's expression was different, he added, "You don't have to be too sad. If I hadn't gotten you down, you might have been crushed to death by the dragon." Unfortunately, the other party didn't feel comforted at all after hearing this, but she didn't show any other emotions. She just nodded silently and changed the subject. "What's your name, sir?" "My name is." Renly subconsciously wanted to lie, but then thought that it seemed unnecessary, so he said, "Renly, just call me Renly." "Sir Renly?" Rhaenys, who had wrapped herself up like a dumpling, solemnly assured, "Thank you for saving me, sir. When we arrive in King's Landing, my husband will repay you. What do you want? Castles and territories? Or money and wealth? Those are of no use to me." Renly waved his hand, and an idea suddenly flashed through his mind, so he said, "I will get you out of here safely, and you give me a dragon egg. How about this deal?" Rhaenys was stunned when she heard it, and then frowned. "What do you want the dragon egg for?" "Of course it is useful. Except for us, no one can hatch dragon eggs, and no one can ride a dragon. I can collect it." "No, I can't agree to your request." Queen Rhaenys shook her head, appearing very decisive, "And there are only adult dragons in our family, no dragon eggs." "That's a pity." Renly sighed when he heard it. "Then I have no choice but to keep you here. I have betrayed Dawn, but it is better to run away by myself than to carry a burden with me." He did not say anything else, but patted his butt and stood up. "We can give you endless money, or other wealth and status, whatever you want. I only want the dragon egg," Renly said, "otherwise why would I risk being hunted down by all the Dornishmen to rescue you? You have no use for the dragon egg. That's my own problem." This made the other party silent for a long time, and finally asked, "Can you really rescue me?" "Not sure." Renly shook his head. "If I can't do it, I guess the Dornishmen will regard me as a traitor and hack me to death. You will be captured by them, and if they are rational, they will probably take you as a hostage, but I don't think they can remain rational. After all, you burned so many people to death, so." He shrugged. "What do you think? I'm risking my life to do this, do you agree? Our family does not allow the dragon egg to be leaked, but..." Staring at the black-haired Dornishman in front of her, Rhaenys nodded. "Deal." "So happy." Renly looked at her suspiciously, feeling that his extortion was a little smoother this time. Do you swear? I swear on the honor of the Targaryen family, as long as you take me out of danger, I will give you a dragon egg. The other party answered seriously. The atmosphere fell into silence, and Renly opened his mouth to say something, but after thinking about it, he closed his mouth. The two of them didn't talk for the next time. One frowned and thought, while the other sat there tightly wrapped in a blanket, looking around vigilantly from time to time, and glancing at Renly intentionally or unintentionally. But it didn't take long for this person to fall asleep, and he seemed to have forgotten all about vigilance and thinking. Renly didn't feel sleepy. On the one hand, he had to keep an eye on whether there would be any benefactors suddenly appearing around, and on the other hand, the temperature was too cold, so he couldn't sleep at all. It was just that he could keep like this at the beginning, but he became drowsy in the second half of the night. From entering this historical place to now, he didn't sleep at all. In a daze, a scream suddenly woke him up. After he stood up, he looked in the direction of the sound, and found that the little queen not far away was staring at a golden lizard crawling slowly on her body with a look of horror. Frowning, Renly stepped forward, then reached out, and grabbed the lizard directly in his hand. Then the dagger flashed, and the head of the object in his hand was directly separated from the body. The tail that was twisting around his wrist also lost its strength immediately. To say that he could only use brute force to solve this problem before, but the ability to make poisons has brought him more than just knowledge about poisons. At this moment, he is as skilled as a native Dornishman in subduing poisons. Seeing this, the little queen breathed a sigh of relief, and then whispered a thank you. Renly ignored her, raised his foot, and kicked the lizard's head into the river next to him, then put the lower half of the lizard's body, which was still bleeding, on the ground, turned the dagger, and began to cut it quickly. Sir Renly, what are you doing? A hoarse voice asked curiously. It may be poisonous, but there is always something edible. Renly answered without looking up, and I'm not a sir, just call me by my name. This seemed to remind the other party of something, and he asked hurriedly, you didn't bring any food? At this time, Renly was peeling off the golden hard skin of the lizard. He shrugged and said, yes, so we can only find it wherever we go. What about water? Isn't the river full of water? Rhaenys turned her head and looked at the turbid water behind her. She frowned unconsciously, and then she looked at a tall cactus not far away. I heard that Dornish people can find water in plants. At least this one can't, unless you are not afraid of vomiting and diarrhea. So the Targaryen queen didn't say anything more, sat on the ground, supported her chin with her wrist, and fell into a state of depression. After such a commotion, she seemed to have lost all her sleepiness. Renly told her to pay attention to the surrounding movements. After dealing with the lizard corpse, he ran to the side and took a nap. In this way, when the dawn of the next day gradually appeared, he had recovered most of his energy. However, at this moment, a new problem was placed in front of the two. The slender woman with her head wrapped in a cloak looked normal when she stood up, but she had just taken a few steps when her feet staggered unconsciously, and then she screamed and collapsed to the ground. Renly saw this and hurriedly reached out to help her, but saw that the other party frowned. He felt something was wrong. The little queen bit her lip, lowered her head and said ashamedly, my butt hurts. Thank you to the book friends Passaby and Half Body Buddha for their 500 rewards, and thank you to the book friends Klisha, Wolf King Wugsu and Old Look New Look for their 100 rewards. Chapter 36, The Fallen Dragon. The yellow scorpion, which looked translucent, cautiously poked its head out from the shadow of the rock, where it was hiding. After a pause, it quickly ran towards the riverbank. However, it had only run a few steps when a foot wearing a thick string sandal with leggings suddenly fell from the sky. The yellow scorpion was suddenly crushed. The heart-shaking creaking sound accompanied by the bright green thick pulp that emerged after the shell was crushed cruelly revealed that an innocent life had died. After looking down at the sole of the foot, the owner of the foot did not feel pity for it. Instead, he rubbed the ground with his foot in bad luck, splashing dust. The scorching sun quietly enveloped the riverbank here, steaming and distorting everything around. The muddy river behind him flowed slowly, and on the bank sat a beautiful woman wearing red satin clothes with silver edges and short and messy hair. Now she was staring at the man with a naked upper body and sweating not far away, or at the stone in front of him. On the relatively flat stone, the man put thin slices of tender white snake meat one by one. The hot rock surface seemed to have become a long heated iron pot. After a while, it played a role that it should not have. The fat flowed out, and the sound was sizzling. The process of the snake meat from raw to cooked was accompanied by not only the color change, but also the emission of a special fragrance. When a dagger pierced all of them into a string and then approached, this emission attracted the attention of the woman on the riverbank. But after she looked at the dagger, she couldn't help but remind the black-haired brown-skinned hook-nosed man, that is, Renly. This dagger is poisonous. How is it poisonous? You used it to squeeze out snake venom yesterday. Yesterday was yesterday, and today is today. Don't worry, it has long been no longer poisonous. Really? The little queen looked at the other party with a suspicious look. Even if there is, the appropriate toxin will make this thing taste better, Renly said, raising his hand to pull out a piece of snake meat and put it into his mouth to chew. It can also relieve pain. So Rena said, reached out and carefully took the dagger, then lowered her head and started eating. Renly nodded with satisfaction, feeling that this little queen who was recorded in history books as lively and willful seemed to be easy to get along with. Whether it was about her hair at first, or some things later, as long as the reasons were explained clearly, she would accept them silently, and did not make random suggestions or get upset. It was just that her curiosity, after getting to know her, was really serious. It was the third day, after she woke up. After a short period of replenishing her energy, Renly carried her on his back, and continued on the road, while horse questions kept coming from behind. They say that the lords of Dornishmen openly keep mistresses? Is that true? Do you think I look like a lord? Renly didn't say anything, but the other party didn't stop talking. Are you Dornishmen familiar with all these? I mean, there are poisonous snakes in the desert. Are you familiar with your home? Renly asked. Of course I'm familiar with it. I grew up on Dragonstone. She was halfway through her words when she realized what she was saying, and then she choked and lost her voice. But soon, the question came up again. Why did you save me? Just because you wanted dragon eggs? What else could it be? For example, do you have a lot of enemies in Dawn? Hatred made you choose to stand on our side? Your fiancé was robbed by someone. Yes, my fiancé broke off the engagement in public, and then made a 3-year agreement. Really? What was the agreement? A duel? Are you sure you're 35 years old? Can you sing? Sing a song. I feel a little bored. No. Good sir, sing one. Just one. Really can't, and I'm not a sir. The weather was already hot and humid, and as they kept moving forward, the man on his back kept talking, making Renly feel like there were a bunch of flies buzzing around his ears. He wondered if he acted too harmless, which made this man so relaxed. But she didn't see the other party showing a thoughtful look on his back, but then her expression turned into astonishment, and then she cried out, because they fell into the river beside them. The cry was accompanied by a splash, and the turbid water swallowed the two of them in an instant. After taking a few gulps of water without warning, Rhaenys barely grabbed a stone to stabilize her body, but found that there was a pair of hands in the water pulling her, so she couldn't help screaming. What are you doing? No one responded to her, and when she saw that she couldn't pull it down, the hands disappeared without a trace. The little queen was angry at this time, but soon turned into regret, because the faint sound of horse hooves came from the upstream direction of the river, and it was getting louder and louder. Renly, where are you? Someone is coming. She called in a low voice, but there was no response in the flowing river at this time. Looking around, there was no cover to hide. Seeing this, Rhaenys gritted her teeth, then took a deep breath, pinched her nose and looked down. Dragonstone is an island off the east coast of Westeros. Growing up there, the first queen of the Targaryen dynasty naturally couldn't be incapable of swimming. However, it was too late for her to hide at this time. With the sound of horse hooves, 3 Dawn Riders were approaching here quickly, and they had obviously discovered the movement. At first, they might have just noticed the noise, but they didn't know the specific situation. But when they got close to a certain distance, the first Black Rider suddenly saw the yellow cloak that had quietly fallen off on the riverbank. He was stunned, and then shouted angrily, "It's that dragon bitch. Come quickly." he said as he turned over and dismounted, then grabbed the spear and rushed over, and the remaining 2 people also dismounted and followed behind him. The slightly turbid river did not show any abnormality on the surface at this time, but the experienced riders had already seen the footprints of a person rushing around, and the traces of splashing water. So one rider stayed on the shore, drew his bow and watched closely, while the other 2 drew out their daggers and quickly rushed into the river, ready to catch the person in the river. But just after they entered the river, the rider on the shore suddenly felt his ankle tighten, and before he had any chance to react, a huge pulling force came instantly. After he couldn't help but screamed, the skinny Dawn rider was directly dragged into the river. The rider who fell into the water struggled hard, and the river splashed with water, but when a sharp object fiercely scratched his neck, he instantly lost most of his strength in struggling. All this happened quickly. When the scream sounded, the 2 who were swimming in the river hurriedly looked back, but what they saw was only the stunned eyes of their companions, and the blood kept flowing out of the neck covered by their hands. The twitching body floated with the flow of the river, and the surging red liquid continued to spread on the surface of the river during this process, and the remaining 2 riders were furious. "It's that traitor," one of them roared, and turned back to swim towards the river bank, while the other continued to move forward regardless of anything. Under the water surface of the grey broken flowstone not far away, he had already seen a hazy and slender figure hiding in the water against the stone. As he moved forward, he vaguely saw the other party's beautiful face under the river, which was becoming more and more terrified. This made the Dornishman seem to be full of strength, and his hands, that were flapping in the water, stretched forward to grab as much as possible, wanting to catch this enemy who was as deep as the sea in his hands as soon as possible. Unfortunately, he still didn't catch the target he wanted in the end. Although the distance was already within reach, a dagger quietly stretched out from the water and crossed his neck at this moment, and his hand holding the dagger was also tightly grasped by someone. A wet black-haired figure floated up next to him. The body that blocked the sunlight looked unusually tall, and a pair of brown eyes looked down quietly. The brown-haired Dornishman shuddered at the sight, and then shouted without turning his head, but the only person who responded was the tall figure beside him who cast a shadow on him. "He's dead, and now you're the only one left. How is that possible?" The Dornishman answered in disbelief, but the fact that there was no sound behind him made him feel depressed. When he first discovered that he was being attacked, he and his companions acted in unison. One continued to swim towards the target in the water, while the other went ashore to shoot the enemy. In this way, no matter which one of them the enemy chose to attack, the other could achieve the goal successfully. But he didn't expect that the man beside him would be so fast. "Now, come ashore with me," the black-haired figure, Renly, ordered. "You're a traitor." The Dornishman floating on the water ignored the words, but showed hatred and disgust on his face. Renly didn't care about it, and after tightening the dagger in his hand, he threatened. "It's coated with the poison of the red thorn scorpion. If you don't listen, I'll let you taste it. Water will wash away your poison, traitor." The Dornishman spat at him. "Want to try?" The Dornishman's face turned blue and red when he heard this. Finally, he glared at Renly unwillingly and was forced to move towards the shore. He might have thought of looking for an opportunity to fight back, and this opportunity was when he climbed ashore. Unfortunately, the enemy took a step ahead of him. Before he could completely get ashore, the opponent directly hit his vitals with his knee. The sudden pain made the Dornishman's strength dissipate instantly, and he couldn't help but scream and wail. When he was dragged ashore and recovered, the dagger had already landed on the surface of his neck again. "What's the situation at Hellgate now?" Renly asked. "I won't tell you, traitor. Is Egan not here yet?" "He's already scared. We killed a dragon," the brown-haired Dornishman who was pressed on the yellow ground proudly declared, and a smile appeared on his sunburned face. "So he really didn't come," Renly muttered, and unconsciously glanced at the woman who followed him up the shore. The other party was also listening to all this quietly, frowning. Obviously, he had fallen into this simple language trap. The Dornishman who reacted was full of anger, so he turned his head with difficulty on the surface and stared at Renly, saying in an angry tone, "You will not end well, traitor. Neither you nor your dragon bitch will end well. All the Dornish lords are looking for you. Even if no one knows you are here now, they will know. Yes, wait and see. They will know." That is obviously not now, Renly replied, and then asked, any last words? The other party just sneered. Renly looked at him quietly for a moment, and the dagger in his hand finally left the Dornishman's neck, but pierced into the other's heart like lightning, while the other hand covered his mouth to prevent the sound from escaping. The dull sound of metal penetrating flesh caused blood to splatter, and the linen cloth on the chest was stained deep red. Facing the twitching body and the rapidly expanding black pupils under him, Renly raised his hand and silently closed his eyes. Then he looked at the little queen who had climbed ashore on her own. Why, your butt doesn't hurt anymore. Chapter 37, The Fallen Dragon. At the edge of the river bank under the sun, the fierce battle has ended. The bodies of 2 riders were swallowed up by the muddy river and disappeared. The remaining one lay motionless on the river bank, and the blood seeped into the sand on the surface, revealing a deep red mark. Why, your butt doesn't hurt again. The slender woman in a wet red satin dress was standing aside and looking at the black-haired man squatting in front of the corpse. The word coming from the front made her face red, but she didn't say anything to quibble, but raised her skirt to salute. Please forgive my caution, Sir Renly. After all, I'm just a weak woman. I hope you can understand. Weak to the point of strangling my neck and hurting? Renly pouted secretly, but this was a process of mutual testing and running in, so he didn't blame her, just nodded. Seeing this, the other party secretly breathed a sigh of relief, and then the purple eyes turned, intentionally or unintentionally saying, just now in the river, I thought you were going to do something bad to me. Renly was squatting and searching the Dornish on the ground at this time, and glanced at her when he heard it. Don't worry, we are not of the same generation. The light words were powerful. Rhaenys couldn't help but look down at herself when she heard them. She looked a little indignant, but she didn't say much. Instead, she changed the subject. When I return to King's Landing, I can introduce you to a noble girl of the same age. I know all the unmarried noble girls in the 7 kingdoms. I can definitely find a suitable match for you. Renly ignored this, and the other party squatted down after seeing this. You look sad, she asked. It's okay, I just feel like I'm dreaming, Renly answered while searching for spoils. He was actually a little confused about whether this world was real or fake. He had asked the person in front of him before, and the answer he got about the Iron Islands was basically the same as what he knew in reality. In other words, this is just a piece of history, not another repeated world. But if it is fake, why do these people in front of him look so real? Feelings, touch, everything is no different from reality. Including Rhaenys beside him. She is naughty and cunning, but what is she? If it was true, why didn't his actions receive any response? The blood and battle stimulated the growth of adrenaline, but it also made Renly quite melancholy. The sun was shining brightly around, but the atmosphere became much quieter. Killing does make people feel uncomfortable. A slightly hoarse female voice said in a low tone. It's like blowing out a burning candle. Even though there are many candles in the house, every time you put out one, everything you see seems to have less light. Then you have been squatting in the small dark room all day. Renly looked at the man in front of him strangely. There are at least 1,000 people, right? It was my dragon who killed them, not me. The little queen couldn't help but explain, but she didn't continue the topic. Instead, she said with a serious expression, I don't want to talk about this. We should talk about business. This made Renly raise his eyebrows. The other party was already sitting upright, frowning and said, my husband may think I'm dead, or he hasn't heard the news yet, but I think the former is more likely. If this is the case, then we can only keep going. If I remember correctly, this river goes south to the sea. Maybe we can take the sea route and then go to Old Town or King Ting Island, which is our territory. Rhaenys' words seemed very heavy. Before, they actually hoped that the conqueror would hear the news and search downstream, so they had been circling around the river, but now it seemed that there was little hope. You don't want to ask your husband for help? Although he hasn't come yet, if he believes you are dead, he will definitely come to take revenge, right? Renly asked with interest. This is the Dornishman's place. The longer we stay here, the more dangerous it will be. Even if we can avoid their search, even if we can meet my husband, we can't ask him for help, because we can't see everything below on the dragon's back. He will just burn us to death as enemies. Rhaenys said melancholy. We dare not fly solo when riding dragons, because dragon riders are the biggest weakness of dragons, and flying at low altitudes will also. You have seen the consequences. Renly nodded, but shook his head. Going by sea is a good idea, but we can't follow this river. Why? Water in the desert is an important resource everywhere. The momentum of your attack on Hellgate has not yet passed, so we can't see anyone at the moment. But just because there is no one now doesn't mean we will never see anyone again. Renly said, I guess if we continue downstream, there will definitely be a Dornish village, or some people coming to get water. In that case, we will be like sheep running into a lion's mouth. Noticing something strange in the words of the black-haired Dornishman, Rhaenys frowned and asked, don't you know where their gathering place is here? I'm actually from Starfall. Renly lied without changing his expression. I'm familiar with Dawn's mountains, but not the deserts and rivers here. Are you from the Dane family? Rhaenys asked curiously. The Dane family from Starfall? Does your family have a sword called Dawnblade? That sword is called Dawn, and Dawnblade is the name of a swordsman. Renly was very surprised that the man in front of him didn't even know this basic common sense, but he didn't continue to explore it, but began to check some of the things he had searched out. In fact, there weren't many. The weather was hot, and the Dornish rider had nothing extra, except the dagger sheath and the clothes he carried. He turned and walked towards the 3 horses. War horses are different from ordinary horses. They will not flee when faced with a fight. Moreover, the fight just now took place in the water, so they were not frightened. When approaching, Renly was a little worried that the horses would turn around and run away, or kick him, so he walked cautiously, but he soon found that the horses seemed surprisingly docile. Facing Renly approaching, one of the black horses even lowered its head and nudged his arm. So Renly let go and began to search the saddlebags on their backs. Water bags filled with water, flint for making fire, oilcloth, leather armor and cotton clothing that had been removed due to the heat, bronze scale armor, antidote, tents, and bedrolls. Almost all the basic rations for a long journey were there, which made Renly feel as if the clouds had cleared and a moon had appeared. The next thing he found was a printed letter written on silk, which made him think of a way to let them fish in troubled waters. So he turned his head and looked at Rhaenys behind him, who was vigilantly scanning the surroundings. In fact, it's not impossible to follow this river. It depends on whether you have the courage. Thank you to the book friends Geoduck in the Desert and Zyanatang 246 for the 100 rewards. Chapter 38, The Fallen Dragon. The desert climate is cold at night, and the air breathed by people and animals is covered with white frost. However, just as the people of Dawn are used to moving in hot weather, they are also used to the opposite temperature difference at night. Many Dornishmen even prefer to move at night, rather than during the day. The river named Soft River is surging not far away, and the sound of it can be clearly heard in a village under a high sandhill not far from the river bank. Dornish buildings are usually made of loess and stones, mixed with those tenacious and tough plants growing in the desert, which are full of exotic style. However, whether it is the people living here or some outsiders, they basically don't pay attention to this. The village is crowded with people at this time. The loud roar of the villagers' scouts makes everyone here lose their sleepiness. They rush out of their homes and gather together. There are riders coming here. A burst of horse hooves can be heard from afar. The people in the village hold sticks and farm tools one by one, looking nervously in the direction of the sound, but some old people are calm about it. If there were cavalry from the north, the Lord would have come to inform us long ago. Those 3 bastards riding dragons can't ride horses either. They must be our own people. A bald old man chewing on grass stems said so, but the increasingly loud sound of horse hooves made the people around him not pay attention to his words. They stared at the direction where the sound came from, and all men and women were ready to fight or flee. However, when they saw the specific attire of the people coming, their tense emotions suddenly relaxed and began to talk. What happened again? It's definitely not a good thing these days. Is it the dragon bastard who came to take revenge? After the dragon fell in the Hellgate castle half a month ago, the riders arrived here along the coast and informed the good news of killing the dragon. But the Dornish people here did not know the real situation. Although this race is united, some news is not suitable for everyone to know, otherwise it will inevitably leak out. However, their speculation about this stopped soon, because the two riders in their sight were already close to a certain distance. They wore brass scale armor and breeches that only soldiers under the Lord would wear. They didn't wear helmets on their heads, but wore black cloaks and hoods, and the lower half of their faces were covered with khaki scarves. From a distance, before reaching the fence at the edge of the village, where the gathering place was located, the rider in front spoke loudly. By order of Lord Allah, Lord of Prison Gate, a reward is offered for 2 fugitives, 1 man and 1 woman. Report any clues immediately. Lord Allah will reward you handsomely. The rider wore a scarf, but his fluent common language with Dornish characteristics perfectly showed his identity. As he spoke, he shook off the silk in his hand, and the 2 simple faces painted on it were reflected in the eyes of the villagers who approached. Silver hair? Is it the dragon bitch? Someone scanned the portrait from head to toe, and then asked, what you said last time, the dragon bitch is dead. The rider reprimanded, don't believe in rumors. But I heard that she escaped. The rider did not answer this question, but stood up proudly. Don't ask questions that you shouldn't ask. Just remember Lord Duel's order. After he finished speaking, he patted his horses, and rode away along the road in front of the village, leaving the villagers here with a fascinating back. Another rider with a dark face behind him glanced at them and followed silently. No one noticed anything unusual about these 2 people. It seemed that they were the messengers sent by the Lord to report, but in fact, it was not the case. The 2 riders trotted one after the other, until those people behind him were far away, and could not be seen at all. The black-faced rider kicked the horse's belly and stepped forward, giggling at the rider in front who seemed very calm, but was actually trembling with fear, and clamping his legs. Good sir, you can't ride a horse. The slightly hoarse voice was obviously not a male voice. I've already said I'm not a sir. The hunched over former rider glared at the other person unhappily. People in Westeros call knights sirs, and those who are not knights would probably be happy to be called that, but Renly just felt that the other person was deliberately mocking him. In fact, he is not yet old enough to learn to ride a horse, and now he can barely ride on the road, which is already his talent. Many people who are not knights can ride horses, even women. There are always exceptions. Renly retorted, but the other party did not stay on this topic. The purple eyes that looked black in the night turned and scanned his whole body with a smile. You know, sometimes I always feel that you don't look like a Dornishman, although you are. After leaving this sentence, the black-faced rider squeezed the horse's belly and ran away first. Looking at the other party's back, Renly curled his lips secretly. This was the 16th day since he came to this historical copy. The 3 Dornishmen attacked by them a while ago were actually responsible for sending messages to various places. After discovering this, Renly decided to pass himself off as the real one, hoping to use this identity to get through the next part of the journey. This is not impossible to accomplish. Although he is an imposter, his voice seems to be instinctively the same as other Dornishmen. At the same time, there is no equipment to record images in this era. At most, someone can draw their appearance. But if the painter has never seen the real person, then their work obviously cannot be very realistic. The deceptive silk portrait in his hand is a proof. In addition, the little Queen Rhaenys is good at makeup skills. She can use charcoal ash and other materials to apply it on the spot. Basically, no one will notice anything unusual at night. In this way, they didn't encounter too many twists and turns along the way, except that they were teased by 2 enthusiastic Dornish women once, and the little queen almost exposed herself. Now, the dark coastline is already dimly visible, and the sound of waves can be faintly heard. When they really get close to the sea, this journey is considered to have reached the end, and the dangers of dawn are basically forgotten. The next leg of the journey is by sea. The premise is that they can get a boat. Under the moonlight, the 2 riders ran straight to the south. The dust raised by the horses' hooves floated up and then quietly dissipated with the cold moonlight. As they approached the sea, the wind around them began to get heavier and colder. They saw the last Dornish village in front of the beach. From a distance, the sound of horses' hooves began to weaken, and they also paid close attention to whether there were scouts around. Is there really a boat here? After looking at the village at the end of the site, Rhaenys asked. They hoped to get a small boat from this village and row away. Most Sol people make a living by fishing, so they must have a boat. Renly replied in a low voice. He has read a book called The Conquest of Dawn, which records the ethnic groups of the Dornish. They are all called Dornish, but just like the Northerners are all called Northerners, it is just a general term. In fact, the Dornish are divided into 3 categories. The author of the book named them Stone People, Sand People, and Salt People. The Stonemen live in the mountains of Dawn, with fair skin and beautiful hair. The Sandmen live in the desert, with their skin generally tanned brown. The last Saltmen live on the southernmost coast of Dawn, with black hair and olive skin of alien characteristics. At this time, the author of the book had not yet been born, and even his ancestor was next to Renly, but many things have been passed down for a long time, and even if you haven't read it, there are generally fishermen in the seaside villages. Renly is very sure of this. As for what to do after getting the boat, that's another matter. Anyway, it's better than being in the enemy's territory. However, before they get close to the village, there is a rumbling sound of horse hooves hitting the ground. After hearing the sound, Renly's face changed, and then he turned around without hesitation. Unfortunately, he just turned around on his horse, and found that a circle of Dornish riders had surrounded him from all directions, and were approaching quickly. In the moonlit desert, a group of riders circled around the 2 men who dared not move, and one of the tall figures glanced at Renly and laughed. The traitor and his dragon bitch will come to us on their own initiative. The priest is right. Chapter 39, The Fallen Dragon. In the dim night, a group of Dornish riders came from all directions and surrounded Renly and his partner. They were all wearing black cloaks, brass scales and leather armor inside, and their spears in the moonlight were shining with sharp luster. Renly had no idea about this group of people who suddenly appeared, and he couldn't figure out why they knew the route of the 2 in advance. However, he had no time to pay attention to this problem at this time. Facing this group of hostile Dornish riders, the black-haired young man who was tightly surrounded in the center had a fast heartbeat. His mind was racing, and he suddenly looked at the big man who had just laughed. "Do you know me?" The big man on horseback with fluffy black hair and olive green skin was obviously the leader of the group. At the same time, Renly noticed that the other riders had the same olive skin as this big man. "Why, you are not going to recognize your old enemy now that you have become a chameleon." The other party smiled and rode a little closer, gesturing at Renly's body with a spear in his hand. "But it doesn't matter. I'm ashamed to even use a traitor like you as my opponent. Do you think I'll stab your neck or your balls?" This made the surrounding Dornish riders laugh. At the same time, they looked at Renly and Rhaenys behind him with excitement and hatred. "If you don't resist, we'll make you die quickly." Another thin-faced old man in a cloak spoke grimly. He didn't look like a soldier, but he was consciously protected by the side. Renly noticed this, but he ignored it for the time being. He looked at the big man with brown eyes and said carefully, "Are you sure you know me? If you really know me, how could you not know what kind of person I am?" "Of course it's a traitor." The big man spat. "Who else could it be? You were very mean before, and you had to use tricks to snatch a woman from me. Only a coward would do that." This man did not order to act directly, and the people around him also kept surrounding him, seeming to be afraid, but they might just be enjoying the joy of victory. However, this gave Renly a chance, although he felt that this chance was a bit bad. "Do you think I would really betray my blood brothers and sisters? The fact is, you betrayed us." Under the moonlight, the big man held the horse rope with a sneer on his face. "But I really didn't think you would do this. There are so many blood feuds, and those who are more despicable than you didn't betray us, you." He shook his head and spat in Renly's direction. The blood-stained liquid instantly melted into the sand. After looking down, Renly suddenly raised his voice. "I didn't betray Dawn. The truth is, I didn't betray Dawn, and I didn't betray you." This sudden shout made the surrounding riders subconsciously tighten their spears, and one of the horses even neighed and was ready to move. However, all this did not affect Renly, who had determined his idea. Although his heart was pounding, he pretended to be solemn on the surface, glanced around, and said in a high-pitched voice, "The dragons of Valyria have risen again. 6 of the 7 kingdoms have been occupied by them, and Dawn will never be spared. Unless I can go to the Mother River and sacrifice this woman with the blood of the Dragon King to our great mother. That's right, only in this way can Dawn be saved." Don't delay the important matter. After the voice fell, the surrounding riders were stunned and then stared at him like a fool. What is he talking about? He said the Mother River Rhone. What does this have to do with the Mother River? Obviously, the Mother River Rhone they are talking about is a river, but also a belief. There are three main human races in Westeros: the First Men, the Andals, and the Rhoynar. They are all outsiders who arrived in this land of sunset one after another and expelled the ancient children of the forest from the stage of history. But unlike the First Men and the Andals, who have footprints all over the continent, the Rhoynar, who arrived last, chose to stay in Dorne, where they first landed, and merged with some of the indigenous people here. After a long time, the Dornish generally have mixed blood with the Rhoynar, and the Salt people are the worst among them. The Rhoynar are a race with olive skin and black hair. The god they believe in is the river called Rhoynar, which they respect as the Mother River of Rhoynar. However, that was the belief of the ancient Rhoynar people, and these mixed blood Dornish Salt people in front of them may have forgotten it long ago. But when Renly heard the tone of these people calling the Mother River, he quickly calmed down and spoke to the big man again. I dreamed of the Mother River, and I understood her will, so I will take this woman to sacrifice to her. You don't understand this, so I can forgive your misunderstanding of me. But now, get out of the way, and prepare a boat and rowers for me. The day I successfully return, that will be the day you completely get rid of the dragon disaster. The black-haired young man spoke arrogantly, but unfortunately he did not achieve his wish. Instead, his words made all the riders stare at him again, holding their weapons in their hands, ready to move. Even if you are a traitor, you must never joke with our Mother River, the burly black-haired man in the lead said with disdain. Or are you a northern bastard? I'm not kidding. Renly immediately retorted after hearing this, and the solemnity on his face gradually turned into anger. I have the blood of the Rhoynar people flowing in my veins. My elders have taught me the greatness of the Mother River Rhoyne since I was a child. I will never joke about it. He spat on the ground and said fiercely to the enemy leader, I thought you could understand, but now I find that I was wrong. You humiliated me and threatened me just now. Wait and see, I will retaliate against you. This made the people around him furious again. One of the long-faced young men raised his spear and prepared to charge. However, he was just about to pose when he was grabbed by the leading man with messy black hair. He then looked at Renly with suspicion, mainly because this man was too unscrupulous, not like being surrounded at all, and did not look ashamed of a traitor at all, but was full of scorching arrogance. Under normal circumstances, he would never let such a provocateur go, but at this moment, the traitor's behavior was completely abnormal, and the big man did know something about the man in front of him. Although he was a little mean and loved to use poison, he did not seem like someone who would suddenly rebel. So he was a little skeptical. What evidence do you have for saying that? No. Renly on horseback said angrily, but why would I betray my own people? For selfish desires? Or for money? Even a fool can see that I will not survive after betraying the entire Dorne. Even if I escape to the free trade cities, the assassins of Dorne will find me sooner or later. Do you think I'm a fool? This is true. It doesn't matter if you offend one or two Dornish lords, but the consequences of offending the entire Dorne are not something that everyone can bear. According to historical records, when the First Dornish War developed to its most intense, the two sides sent assassins to assassinate each other's leaders. Aegon the Conqueror was almost stabbed to death in King's Landing, which also led to the birth of the King's Guard, a guard organization that protects the king. Although the Dornish riders around did not understand this, they always had a blind confidence in their own side, so they looked at each other after hearing the words, and their hostility weakened a lot. Even the leader was lost in thought, but at this moment, the skinny old man beside him spoke grimly. Who knows what you are thinking? Maybe you are in love with this dragon bitch, or maybe you have other reasons. I warn you, boy, if you deceive us again in the name of the Mother River, we will let you taste the pain of the real Mother River's anger. When this man spoke, all the riders around him looked at him. Even the leader was no exception, as if he was in a more important position. However, Renly was not speechless after hearing this. Although his heart was beating fast, he was furious. You old idiot. If I really wanted to save her, why didn't I hide? Hide anywhere and ask Aegon for help when he came to avenge us. Instead, I ran here. ran to the hands of you, an idiot. The old man's face darkened at these words, but Renly's words did not stop. Instead, he spoke more and more fluently and more excitedly, as if he had really become a real Dornishman, and when he mentioned the word Mother River, he was full of fanatical piety. That's the best rescue route. What's the point of me running here? It's because of the people here, because of you. Because you have the blood of the Rhoynar. Because you understand the greatness of the Mother River. Because you can help me get this done. Otherwise, why would I run here? Why? Tell me why. This made the Dornish people hesitate again. They looked at each other, the big man in the lead and the old man beside him, but found that the two were also hesitant at this time. The Dornish were seriously influenced by the Rhoynar civilization, so their cultural customs were obviously different from other places, and this influence was particularly prominent among the Salt people living on the seashore. So although they may no longer believe in the gods they once believed in, they could not completely ignore it. Without looking carefully, Renly noticed the hesitation of these people, but it was not time to really relax, so he took advantage of the time when the people around him did not react, and started talking again. Most Dornishmen never understand this. The blood of the first men and the Andals occupies them all, without Rhoynar. So I have to stay away from them, because they will stop me. They have been blinded by hatred. They will bury Dorne in the fire of the dragon. The Dragon King of Valyria has risen again. He wants to get his hands on our last home, and he does have the ability to do so. Only the Mother River can save us. You idiots, sacrifice this woman to the Mother River, and we can be redeemed. If you obstruct the will of the Mother River Rhoynar, you are the real traitors. He had already thrown away the weapon in his hand when he spoke, looking fearless, but the more arrogant his attitude seemed to prove the correctness of his words, and even Rhaenys beside him looked surprised. She thought it was a trick of Renly at first, but the more she listened, the more she felt that it was the case. The Targaryen family originally came from another continent, a country called Valyria Freehold. The Targaryens were originally just one of the many dragon-riding families in that country. Later, after Valyria was destroyed by the Scourge, they became the last Dragon King family in the world. The rise of Valyria Freehold was accompanied by the fall of many other civilizations. The Rhoynar was one of them, and it was also the most tenacious one to resist. In other words, the Valyrians and the Rhoynar were simply a pair of mortal enemies. So Rhaenys naturally knew something about the history of the Rhoynar. This civilization possessed a special water magic inherited from a river called the Rhoynar. In its heyday, it even fought against the Valyrian dragons. Although it had to abandon its homeland and flee to Westeros in defeat, it also caused serious losses to Valyria. As a Valyrian, Rhaenys could not help but understand this. However, it was precisely because she understood that she knew that what Renly said was not false and the sacrifice was true. And what sacrifice could be more powerful than the blood of a Valyrian dragon king who once brought destruction to Rhoynar? So this is his real purpose? The little queen understood this, so she was quite annoyed and desperate. She felt that she was really naive and ridiculous before believing the words of this cunning Dornishman. Relatively speaking, although most of the Dornish riders around were illiterate, they also grew up listening to the great achievements of their ancient ancestors. Naturally, they could not be unaware of some of the true and false things. Even the old man with thin cheeks has always claimed to be the priest of the Mother River of Rhone. The old man does have a special power. Apart from anything else, praying all day has given him a kind of foresight. For example, the ambush tonight was because he dreamed of a silver dragon coming down the river. At the same time, because of his special status, he also knew the true result of the prison gate castle incident. But the priest ran into a guy who claimed to be the messenger of the Mother River. The atmosphere became a little weird for a while. Although the riders did not rush forward, they did not completely agree with Renly's words. Instead, they hesitated and wandered in place, looking at the leading old priest and the black-haired man. However, the two of them were standing there frowning and silent, and they didn't seem to know what to do. Renly gritted his teeth when he saw this. I know you idiots doubt me, but it doesn't matter. The Mother River has given me power, and I can show it to you, and then you will naturally know what to do. These words made the contemplative old priest look up, his cloudy eyes mixed with expectation and suspicion. What power can you show? Thank you to the book friend Sankian Mengi for the 2000 reward. Thank you to the book friend Lurengia for the 500 reward, and thank you to the book friend 161,211,131,358,140 for the 100 reward. Chapter 40, The Fallen Dragon. The moonlight was sparse at night. An olive-skinned Dornish rider untied the rope of a large flat-deck fishing boat that was rarely used and moored on the coast not far from the fishing village. Then he and a group of Dornishmen boarded the boat, raised the sail, and rowed away from the coast. If you ask me, how could he get sick if he was blessed by the Mother River Rhone? A crew member muttered quietly while rowing, looking at the black-haired man who was slumped at the stern. The other man was groaning and seemed to have a fever. Doesn't the priest always get sick? Another person retorted, but didn't dare to speak too loudly because the priest was sitting at the bow of the boat, talking to the leading Dornishman. He was able to stay in the sea for so long without being drowned. I think what he said is true. This person said with awe, I have seen him. He couldn't do it before. Maybe it's some evil method. Whatever the priest thinks is true, it is true. The agreeing person replied in a low voice, and he is right. There is no reason for him to betray us or come to us. I just feel that he is not lying. Another person who was listening nearby nodded in agreement. This basically represents the thoughts of most people on this ship, and the people on this ship are all the soldiers on horseback before. The bargaining chip that finalized the ending was that Renly held his breath in the sea for 3 hours. At first, despite his many words, these Dornish people still had doubts in their hearts, but with the emergence of that supernatural situation, most people unconsciously believed him completely, and then had a strong belief in sacrifice and the Mother River. It is hard to say whether they were persuaded by words or aroused by that special power to resist the dragon. In short, Renly and Rhaenys were among the more than 20 people on this ship. The little queen, still with a dark face, was now tied up and trapped at the mast. Facing the hostile eyes around her, her face was full of anger and despair, and there was also a trace of barely detectable fear. In comparison, her former companions were treated much better. The Dornishmen who were hostile to Renly at the beginning now politely invited him on board, and the most polite one was the gloomy old man. However, despite this, Renly did not gain complete trust. All the weapons in his hands were taken away before he boarded the ship. At the same time, 2 soldiers were always near him, seemingly sitting casually, but in fact they were on guard against him jumping into the sea and escaping. But this was already a good treatment, better than being hacked to death on the spot. Renly was very satisfied with this. He believed that everything should be done step by step, and now it was just the beginning. At the moment, there was only one thing he needed to do, pretend to be sick. He was indeed doing this, lying motionless at the stern, with a weak face. Ever since he emerged from the sea, he looked sick. After getting on board, he even leaned against the stern with a confused face as if he had fallen into a coma. No matter who spoke to him, basically no effective response was given. This inevitably raised a little doubt in the people around him, but Renly had to do it. The reason was simple. He was a fake Dornishman, and even a fake Rhoynar. He only knew some common sense about this race from books, and didn't know much more. It was okay to fool people for a short period of time, but if he continued to talk, he would definitely be exposed. Not to mention that there was a so-called former opponent here, so he could only do this. But Renly was not just pretending to be sick now. He was actually not feeling well at the moment. At this time, his throat was very sore. A mouth cannon with shouting and yelling was effective, but it also brought some bad consequences. Of course, this didn't have much impact, but another situation was much more serious than the sore throat. Lurking in the seawater was completely different from the feeling of being in a basin or even a river. Being in the sea, it seemed as if endless coldness was pouring towards him continuously, allowing him to survive underwater for a long time, but the heat in his body was constantly driven away by the cold, so that the longer he dived, the more severe the coldness he felt. It might be better if he could come up to breathe, but in order to achieve the effect, Renly kept gritting his teeth and persisted, so that after breaking the surface of the water, he was already trembling all over, and his face was pale. He estimated that, if he continued to stay there, he would probably be frozen to death. So intentionally or unintentionally, the fact that Renly was sick seemed very real, and there was no illusion at all. However, the discussion about him did not stop because of this. No matter what, the Dornishmen on this ship were going against the overall Dornish people, and facing this huge pressure, they were inevitably impatient. This matter was done suddenly, but he has power, and everyone has seen it. The old priest at the bow was comforting his companions in front of him. Words can be false, but the Mother River's gift cannot. You can't stay in the water for so long, and neither can I. He is very courageous, and the great Mother River must have seen that in him. The old man who was hostile at first now seemed to have become a die-hard fan of Renly, and he was quite respectful and expectant of him in his conversation. I don't doubt his words too much. The black-haired Dornishman who was talking to him shook his head and denied it, saying, "I'm just worried. What if Lord Ulla finds out about us doing this?" They were originally excited to gather people, to ambush and capture people, and they ambushed for several days, before they finally encountered the target. As a result, after a negotiation, they followed the traitor to the sea. Although they didn't think the traitor was a real traitor at this time, others didn't know. If this matter spread out, there might be serious consequences. Ulla's castle is half a month away from us, the old priest said. Even if someone goes to report the news, we will have already reached the Greenblood River by then. As he said that, he snorted. By then, we will meet with the high priest and get his support. Then even if Ulla knows about it, it can't be changed. There is a river called the Greenblood River in the eastern part of Dorne. There are some Rhoynar people with pure blood in it. They refuse to integrate into the local culture of Dorne, and have always maintained the customs of the ancient Rhoynar civilization. The old priest once came from there, and their goal at this time is also there. The sacrificial road to the Rhoynar River passes by the Greenblood River. At the same time, if they want to accomplish this, they must win over allies. The premise is that what we did is right. The big man answered sullenly. He actually believed Renly's words at this time, otherwise he would not support this action. But before the facts really happen, there will always be doubts and concerns. Otherwise, can the high priest you said still support us? The old priest smiled slightly when he heard this. We can't be sure what he said is true, but no one can say it is false. Whether it is true or false, the high priest will naturally make the right judgment. There are some things he didn't say, but in fact, the people on the ship knew it very well. Although they are illiterate, they are not stupid. If what Renly said is true, then everything is fine. If it is false, the cost is just a distance. With the captives in hand, when and how to deal with them is up to them. Even thinking deeply, catching Rhaenys, the enemy of Dorne, can bring them more benefits if they handle it well. Of course, most riders have not thought about this problem, but the old man who is a priest has always had this idea whether it is true or false. What happened tonight is a good thing for them. Obviously the old priest did not think that there would be any accidents. It's a pity that he did not consider someone's cunning. Although Renly had been searched all over before, and his weapons were basically removed except for his clothes, he actually hid a dagger secretly. With the ability to master the dagger, he hid it skillfully without being discovered by the Dornishmen. At this time, Renly, who was slumped against the stern, looked very weak, but in fact he had been paying attention to the surrounding situation, ready to attack when the right opportunity came. At present, there were no more Dornishmen on the ship than on land, but being in the sea, and relying on the breath of mermaids, Renly believed that, even if he could not defeat them, he could jump into the sea, and try to pierce the ship. By then, it was time for him to take the initiative. Unfortunately, before his plan could really be implemented, a rather strange accident suddenly occurred. The storm came. Thank you to the book friend Sanchi Hay for the reward of 10,000. Thank you to the book friend Leona Wenyesuo and the book friend Liang Chenbu Crossing Yi for the reward of 100. Chapter 41 The Fallen Dragon. Before setting sail, the wind was in the right direction, so the rowing Dornishmen were able to relax and rest. Some of them hunched over the planks and fell asleep, while others gathered around a burning fire and chatted, pointing at the woman trapped at the mast. However, when the wind around them became stronger and stronger, they had no time to think about anything else. The violent wind made the ship move forward at a fast speed, but the waves below were surging and bumpy, making the ship extremely unstable. Seeing this, the 6 Dornishmen who were on night watch hurriedly began to retract the sails and kick their sleeping companions awake one by one, but this did not bring any lucky results to this small flat-bottomed fishing boat. The fierce sea breeze soon blew out the burning fire on the boat, and the surroundings fell into a gloomy darkness. There were dark clouds above their heads, and bursts of lightning flashed from time to time, and dense raindrops began to fall quickly. Faced with this situation, the Dornish people shouted in panic. Some held the wooden oars tightly and shook them vigorously to resist the turbulence of the waves, and some ran quickly on the boat to keep the boat balanced. The black-haired man in the lead shouted and commanded, while the thin old priest next to him knelt at the bow, clenched his hands, and prayed silently towards the east of the ocean. Unfortunately, neither the sailors' oars nor the priest's prayers could stop the ship from becoming more and more unstable. The old priest, who prayed for a long time without any effect, looked at the stern in panic, hoping that someone could be as reliable as he claimed, but he saw that the other person was no longer there. The little queen who was tied tightly to the mast laughed unconsciously and was slapped hard by the leading man. The next moment, a huge wave suddenly rose on the left side of the ship, directly swallowing up the large fishing boat. The arrival of the waves was like the collapse of the sky above. The ships in the hazy environment screamed and were instantly overturned. Soon they broke into pieces again. More than 20 Dornishmen fell into the sea. They relied on their water skills to flee hurriedly under the dark sea surface, but were forced to separate under the turbulent currents. Their faces disappeared in horror in all directions of the deep sea. The little queen, who was still tied tightly, stood upside down in the ocean. Her purple eyes widened, her cheeks bulged, and her hands tied to the wooden pole struggled hard, but the oxygen in her lungs became scarcer, and she never broke free. Just when she was about to open her mouth, a figure approached from the right side of her body. The familiar face made her feel surprised and angry, but it seemed to make her a little out of breath, so her already shaky mouth could no longer hold on, and the seawater rushed in. Everything in front of her seemed to be turned upside down and fell into chaos. It was not until she felt the ubiquitous seawater disappear that Rhaenys finally regained some consciousness. After vomiting a lot of seawater in the storm, she raised her hand and slapped the man beside her whose face she could not see clearly. Then her eyes went dark and she fell into a coma. When she woke up again, it was the next day when the sea was calm. She opened her eyes and stared blankly at the clear sky above, feeling the hard and wet wooden board under her. Rhaenys' eyes were dull for a while, and finally her eyes focused, and she turned her head to look at the black-haired man beside her who was looking down at her. Once again, I thought you were really going to betray me, she murmured. Last time by the river, you suddenly threw me into the river, and I thought you wanted to go back on your word. This time you pretended like that, and I almost believed you. Is there anyone in the world who is more of a liar than you? If I hadn't lied to you, we would have been hacked to death long ago. Renly replied, his brown eyes scanning the target in front of him, and he nodded with satisfaction. The other person's face was pale, and one side of his face was a little swollen and bruised, but he seemed to be in good spirits overall. Can't you just say hello to me? The hoarse voice sounded very dissatisfied. Why should I fight you? He was interrupted by the person below him who raised his hand and grabbed the front of his clothes before he finished speaking. His upper body was pulled down by a huge force, and his mouth was blocked immediately. The unfinished words turned into a whimper. Looking at the woman with beautiful purple eyes in front of him with wide eyes, Renly was confused for a moment, and only one thought kept lingering in his mind. How could she be so strong? His lips felt cold, but after a while, he suddenly felt a sharp pain, and then the force that bound his body loosened. When he turned around, an angry word came from under him. It doesn't feel good, does it? But that's how I feel now. Renly touched his bleeding lips and stared at the other person with doubtful eyes. Do you want to retaliate like this? Next time something like this happens, you must tell me in advance. The other party did not respond directly and seemed to feel that she was a little angry, so she stood up and glared at Renly, then turned around to look around. Then she was a little dumbfounded. Under her was a thick wooden board, which looked like a fragment of the previous ship. It was not large and floated on the sea like a shelf of a broken table. The surrounding light was bright and sufficient, but no matter which direction she looked, all she could see was a vast expanse of seawater. What should we do next? She couldn't help but turn back to look at Renly, and her voice unconsciously became much weaker. I saved the food and water. Renly was covering his injured mouth with his sleeve at this time, and pointed behind him unhappily. So Renly saw that behind the wreckage, a thick rope was pulling some scattered wooden barrels and bundles. As long as we don't have the bad luck to encounter a storm again, we can hold on for another month, Renly said, and suddenly frowned. He felt that this matter was very wrong. Why did he always encounter shipwrecks or storms when he was at sea? What about after a month? The other party asked hurriedly. If we are lucky, we'll meet a ship. If we are unlucky, I can try diving and catching fish, but that won't last long, because we have no water. Renly answered absent-mindedly. You mean, we might die of thirst at sea? If you want, you can also choose to dive into the sea and drown. I think that might be better than dying of thirst. The little queen glared at him, but then she suddenly thought of something, and moved closer with curiosity. Her purple eyes stared at Renly, as if she was looking at a rare animal. How can you hold your breath in the sea for so long? How did you do it? This is the power given to me by the great mother river. Only a fool would believe the words of a liar like you. Tell me, what's going on? I don't want to say it. I'll trade my secret with you. I'm not interested. Well, I thought you were interested in dragons. The life of drifting on the sea is actually quite familiar to Renly. After all, he had drifted once not long ago. However, the current situation is different from the last time. The sunken wood plank under him was not a complete ship, and he was always worried that it would suddenly sink into the water at some point. He also couldn't sleep well, because there were no guardrails, and a bump was enough to push the two into the sea. Renly was not afraid of this, but Rhaenys beside him didn't have the same ability. However, in the end, Renly, who was not afraid of water, couldn't sleep well every night, because he was always afraid that he would wake up and find that the mission target beside him had already fallen into the sea and choked to death. The little queen was also terrified at first, but she soon found that with Renly around, she didn't seem to need to worry about this, so she slept very soundly every time afterwards, and some of her defenses against Renly in her heart quietly dissipated a lot. This inevitably made Renly feel sour, and what made him even more envious was that the other party was not afraid of the cold even more than him. The sea at night is much colder than during the day. Although it is not as strong as a desert, it is enough to make people shiver with cold. However, the clothes she was wearing were the leather armor and clothing of Dornish riders that she had used as a disguise, but she didn't seem to feel the cold at all. People in my family are not afraid of the cold. Facing Renly's puzzled look, she took the initiative to explain. Are you not afraid of fire? That's just a rumor. Rhaenys shook her head and denied. We can withstand high temperatures, but we are not afraid of fire. Flames can still hurt us, but they are weaker than ordinary people. This made Renly frown, and thinking of a pea shooter in his memory, he couldn't help but ask a question. Is there really no one who is not afraid of fire? If there is, it can only be the ancient dragon kings who mastered the long-lost Valyrian magic. Rhaenys nodded her chin and answered, and then added, it can't be said to be lost, but it's ineffective. In fact, I know all those magic spells, but none of them worked. When the little queen said this, she was quite frustrated and melancholy. Renly asked a spell curiously, but she recited a messy syllable without hesitation, showing that she didn't cherish it at all. He tried to write it down, but found that he couldn't remember it for some reason, so Renly had no choice but to give up. As the sun rose and set, as time passed, the two people on the isolated island could not avoid each other in many cases, and there was nothing else to do except talking, so gradually, they seemed to become good friends who could talk about everything. Renly learned many childhood stories of the little queen and some of her experiences with dragons, while the other party became more and more suspicious of his true identity. During a conversation, she said something intentionally or unintentionally. I suspect you are a disguised faceless man from Bravos. Those people have always been interested in our family. Renly denied it, but Rhaenys just rolled her eyes at him and didn't ask any more questions. The atmosphere was calm at first, but as food and water became less and less, the atmosphere on the small boat became more and more depressing and dull. At the same time, the calmness on the sea quietly dissipated. On a cloudy night, the surrounding sea breeze gradually became stronger, and finally mixed with heavy rain bombarded the wreckage and the two people in it. Another storm suddenly came. Thank you to the book friend Jifanguoi for the 200 reward, and thank you to the book friend Kixizize for the 100 reward. It is also worth mentioning that regarding the fire immunity, Mr. Martin said that Daenerys' fire immunity was a miracle and could not be replicated, so her secondary use in the play was purely fabricated by 2DB, or the old man was lying. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 42, The Fallen Dragon. The thunder roared like the angry roar of the gods in the clouds. The wind was fierce and the rain was heavy over the dark ocean. Occasionally, there were flashes of pale lightning, which made the two drowned figures in the turbulent sea water look miserable. The broken planks that had been used to sustain their survival had been swept away by the waves and disappeared. Most of the food and supplies that were carried were also washed away. The remaining ones were held tightly in the arms of the two people with difficulty, but they could not bring any comfort. The surrounding sea water was turbulent and swaying, and the sound of the storm filled the whole world. Rhaenys, who was tied tightly with a rope beside him, said something to Renly, but he could not hear it clearly. The other party then leaned over and shouted in his ear, "Are we going to die?" "Maybe not," Renly shouted back to the beautiful woman with wet short hair clinging to her face, but before he finished speaking, a huge wave hit and the two were completely swallowed by the sea. The storm on the sea surface did not stop because of this, but became more and more intense. The vast sea roared and shook, and the violent turbulence under the sea surface was like a strong air wave, washing all the materials inside to the east and west, and finally no one knew where they were. Time passed, and the turbulence of the sea water continued, until the storm slowly stopped. The dark clouds in the sky quietly dissipated, and a ray of sunlight pierced through the clouds, and shone on the sea surface somewhere, and continued to spread. This storm was over. Finally, when the clouds dispersed, the dark sea had become extremely blue. It turned out that the sky had already dawned. In the sea, on an island beach covered with palm trees, two uninvited guests tied together by ropes were washed in by the waves. After lying motionless on the beach for a long time, one of the slender figures trembled and untied the rope, then struggled to stand up and staggered towards the end of the beach. The other one was still shivering and lying there with his arms folded, his whole body wet, as if there were ice chips sticking to his face and exposed skin. Although the surrounding sunlight was bright, it could not dispel the coldness that filled his whole body. Even for half a day, this person did not move his body even once. Not long after, the figure who had left earlier returned and sat down next to the trembling one, his voice hoarse and desperate. "I'm afraid this is a deserted island. I don't see any signs of people living here. A deserted island is better than falling into the hands of the enemy," the black-haired man on the beach said tremblingly. After basking in the sun for a long time, he seemed to have recovered some strength, so he struggled to stand up and sat on the sand with his face up, his teeth chattering uncontrollably. "But we have nothing to eat, and no water," Rhaenys muttered. "Even if there are prey here, do we have to eat raw meat?" Without saying anything, Renly tremblingly handed the other party a brown black leather bag with the straps untied. Rhaenys took it and opened it, and found a piece of flint and 2 silver daggers inside, which made her look up at him in surprise. "Did you expect this?" "If I had expected it earlier, how could I have ended up in such a place?" Renly, with a pale face, trembled and answered. The continuous diving obviously exceeded the upper limit of his body's tolerance, so much so that at this time he felt that the cold had penetrated into his bones, and the coldness attacked his forehead and refused to dissipate for a long time. Renly seriously suspected that, if this was his real body, then after such a commotion, he would definitely have some difficult root cause of illness, which made him alert, and decided to take it easy outside the copy, and not be careless. Rhaenys didn't know what the other party was thinking at this time. Seeing his strange expression, she couldn't help but laugh at herself. "Why, do you regret it?" "Yes. Renly nodded with difficulty. We should walk along the seashore, or think of other ways. Going by sea is definitely a bad choice. This made Rhaenys stunned for a while, and then suddenly changed the subject. Is this how you saved me in the first place? What? You know what I'm talking about. I don't have time to play dumb with you. After rubbing his hands, Renly stood up trembling all over, and began to walk slowly on the beach. At this time, he didn't know where his boots were lost. His bare feet seemed very comfortable on the soft sand, but the breeze blowing from the nearby ocean always made him shiver, so he walked towards the depths of the beach. Really just for the dragon eggs? Staring at the other party's back, the little queen looked dazed. Dragon eggs are precious, but they are not equal to dragons. Unless you have the blood of the Valyrian Dragon King, you can't hatch a dragon, even if you get a dragon egg. And even if you can hatch a dragon, you can't control a dragon without the corresponding bloodline. Although dragon eggs can bring a lot of wealth due to their rarity, if it's really for money, isn't it better to just ask for it directly than for dragon eggs? Thinking about it, or thoughts suddenly flashed through her mind, and Rhaenys couldn't help but shout at the figure pacing back and forth at the end of her sight. Did you know me before? I guess so. The voice sounded very weak when it came from a distance. I saw you in a book. What do you mean? It means that someone wrote your story in a book, and then I saw it. Rhaenys frowned when she heard it, and a sudden anger suddenly emerged from the bottom of her heart, so she patted her butt, stood up, and walked quickly towards the other party. How many of your words are true? I forgot what I said. Renly, who was at the end of the beach, answered. At this time, he was walking back and forth, to speed up the blood flow in his body to dispel the cold. You said you were a Dornishman. Isn't that obvious? Then where is the territory of the Korga family in Dorne? What is their emblem? In Sandstone, in the west of Dorne, the emblem is 3 black scorpions on a red background. House of Weir? Along the Bone Road, the family castle is called Weir, close to the border of Dorne. What about House of Dane? Starfall, in the west of Dorne, on the edge of the coast of the Summer Sea. Renly said, looking at the man who walked in front of him, and couldn't help saying, if you are bored, why don't you try the spells of your family? Maybe one of them will work, and solve the current problem. How far is Starfall from Hellgate? Or how long does it take to walk? Who is the patriarch? You said you were from Starfall. Rhaenys ignored Renly's words, but stared at him and asked. This question made Renly blink. Most of the families in Westeros have a history of more than 1,000 years, so many of the knowledge he had learned are applicable at the moment, but learning does not mean that he has really come into contact with it. No matter how much knowledge he learned from books, he could not know the distance between two things, unless there was a corresponding record in the book. However, there was no record in reality, or even if there was, he had never learned it. So Renly frowned and said, you have bad breath. Have you not brushed your teeth for a few days? This made the serious Rhaenys blush instantly, and then she grabbed the collar of Renly's linen clothes, and pulled it in front of her in anger. Don't try to change the subject. Tell me, who are you? It was this huge power again. Renly found that, although the other party looked like a weak woman, she was very strong, so that he was even unable to break free when facing this face, so close at hand. What does it matter? It's not important. He felt that the other party was too emotional, so he reminded her. I promised to rescue you, and you promised to give me the dragon egg. It's a very simple thing. The little queen was stunned when she heard the words, and then suddenly let go of her hand, stepped back 2 steps, and looked at Renly quietly. Do you really think I will give you a dragon egg? Or, do you really think I will keep my promise? You swore an oath. I do not believe in any god, and the dragon kings of Valyria never believe in gods. Her tone seemed a little strange. Even if I break my oath, who will punish me? You swore on the honor of your family. Only my brother cares about the so-called honor. She said, can it be eaten as a meal? Or can it kill enemies for us? I saved you. Renly said, you can't be ungrateful. There are many ways to repay, but not dragon eggs. So you plan to default on your debt. Of course, I formally tell you that I have no intention of keeping my promise at all. Rhaenys nodded frankly. So what can you do to me? Renly touched his chin, did not answer the question, but looked at the other party with strange eyes. Why are you telling me this now? You could have kept it from me forever. Does it still matter? The little queen asked, glancing around with a bitter voice. We've been drifting on the sea for so long, we don't even know where this place is. And even we ourselves don't know where this island is. Who would know? Who can come to save us? If you can't fulfill your promise, I won't be able to give you dragon eggs again. That's not necessarily true. Renly shrugged. Maybe a ship will pass by here in a few days. I don't think I'll be that lucky. Rena sneered. You know, except for the eyes, adult dragons have no weaknesses, but they just shot its eyes. This doesn't prove anything. Then what about that weird old man? What about the storm? A storm may be accidental, and we encountered 2 in a row. Renly coughed dryly when he heard this. He suspected that he might have caused the storm, although he was not sure why. But he couldn't tell the other party this, so he comforted him. Don't worry, there will be a way. What way? The other party asked. Not yet, but there will be one. Without saying anything, Rhaenys looked at Renly in silence until he frowned unconsciously. She suddenly spoke. I told you that I would not give you the dragon egg, but you were not angry at all. But you keep claiming that you saved me just because of the dragon egg. Do you think this is normal? If you really don't give it to me, what can I do? So I look like a fool? The sharp questioning made Renly raise his eyebrows, but after Queen Rhaenys took a deep breath, her voice calmed down. I just checked. From here to the other side of the island, it's all dead. I didn't see any prey or water. It's all sea around, without any trace of land. How long do you think we can survive under this situation? Are you scared? Aren't you scared? Renly didn't answer, but turned his head to look into the depths of the island. It's no wonder that the other party was emotional. From the appearance alone, this island is really a deserted island, with trees, sand, cold shallows and endless sea. A circle of sand surrounds the outer perimeter of the island, and inside grows some lush and straight palm trees. Looking through the gaps in the woods, there is no sign of any animal existence. I can try to catch fish. He turned around and said to the other party, we have flint, daggers, and trees here. There is no need to worry about food. What about water? I'll go into the woods and take a closer look later. Renly replied, maybe we'll find some plants that quench our thirst. Rhaenys said nothing, but looked at him quietly for a long time, and suddenly lowered her head and murmured, why are you always so confident? Don't you feel despair at all? Falling from the sky, being captured, shipwreck, storm, island. We are already very unlucky, but you have never complained. Even if there is food and water, what next? Do you really think we will leave here smoothly? There is always hope to survive. Renly replied, and seeing that the other party was silent and did not speak again, he patted his arm to comfort him, and then looked around. The island was surrounded by sea water on all sides, with a circle of green on the edge and azure blue on the periphery. There was no sign of any land or other islands outside, only the deep blue sea stretched endlessly to the end of the sight. He had no idea where he was, as if the island had become the whole world. Renly frowned. The reason why he was not affected by his situation and became bored or even desperate was very simple. He was not from here. This also made him think of the 3 things unconsciously. The first thing had been completed long ago, and there was no need to worry about the second one. Although it felt like time was passing a bit chaotic, it was roughly estimated that there were only a few days left in a month. Only this last thing. Thinking of this, Renly looked up at the sky. We've come this far, so we can't give up, right? He murmured, thoughtfully. At this time, the sun was high above the head, and the cloudless sky showed the clear and bright weather after the storm. The sunshine from the sky was warm and pleasant, and the sea breeze blew on the face, bringing a hint of salty smell and coolness. Thank you for the 500 reward from the book Friend Stupid Called Simple. Chapter 43, The Fallen Dragon. The situation was not as bad as he had imagined. After dispelling the chill in his body, Renly officially began to explore the island. Then he found that, although the island was not very big, the resources on it were quite rich. Palms, hibiscus, bananas, coconut trees, and even lemon trees. The vegetation on this small island is diverse. At the same time, he found a small pond that looked dirty and covered under stones in the depths of the forest. The water in the pond was dirty and yellow. It might be rainwater accumulation or groundwater infiltration. Renly was not sure whether the water was drinkable at first, but after observing for a while, he found that many small animals such as squirrels came to drink water, and even birds. So he was relieved. In terms of food, there were indeed no common prey, but Renly found a red and green venomous snake on the island. This snake is a natural enemy of the rats on the island, but in the face of Renly, who has the knowledge of making poisons, it can only be regarded as food. In addition, he also found a large crab that specializes in eating coconuts. It looks ferocious and scary, but it tastes very delicious when roasted. There were also common crabs and sea snails emerging from the waves on the beach, and there were also some large and small shells dotted everywhere on the beach. The big shells could be used to collect rainwater, or as small pots for boiling water and stewing soup. After the initial stabilization, Renly even boiled a pot of lemon tea with the leaves and shells of lemon trees. In this way, food and water were not lacking for the time being. As for the residents, although he did not find a natural residence such as a cave here, he found raw materials on the spot and wove a thatched shed with palm and banana leaves. The ropes made of tough bark were quite strong, and the branches and beams placed horizontally on the forks of the two lemon trees were also tightly fixed at both ends. Even if the wind blew on the island, there was no swaying. Of course, all this was not so easy to do, but due to the special system in his body, as long as he did it once, the skills he showed next would become more and more proficient, so much so that the little Queen Rhaenys was dazzled by the sight. When Renly turned the thatched hut at the edge of the woods into a low triangular house, she finally couldn't help but ask, "Have you learned these before? First use your brain, then your hands, and then you will learn it." Renly shrugged and answered, "In fact, some vague memories and knowledge from the previous life should also be taken into account, but there is no need to tell the person in front of him." He also gained benefits in this process: cooking, construction, and horse riding and swimming, which he had learned before, although the level is only the lowest level, but the number seems to be a kind of gain. It's just that Renly feels that other than riding and swimming, other skills are not very useful in the world outside the dungeon. After all, he can't be a cook, nor will he be a stonemason or a carpenter. But for now, because of his series of actions, the originally depressed little queen has gradually regained some of her former liveliness and cheerfulness. She laughs a lot more every day, and will follow Renly's, but to help him out. Unlike the beginning, she looked at the sea and sighed all day long, as if she had tacitly accepted everything in front of her. Her problems have also become a lot. At first Renly responded patiently, but gradually he began to feel a group of flies buzzing around his ears. On the 7th night, after being stranded on this island, a fire lit up the shed. Rhaenys, squatting beside it, covered her conch cup with both hands. The mist from the hot lemon tea covered her cheeks hazily, but it couldn't hide her curious purple eyes. "How did you faceless men change your faces? Is it magic? Or a special mask?" Renly, who was sitting on a tree stump stool and stirring the fire in front of him, glanced at her. "I've already said that I'm not a faceless man. Then how did you become a Dornishman? Are you so sure that I'm not a Dornishman? Of course, and you didn't deny my suspicion." The little queen said, "So how did you become a Dornishman?" Renly ignored her, but the other party didn't stop talking. "Have you expected that I would appear in Prison Gate? Or did you go there for other things? How on earth did you manage to breathe underwater? Are you married? Do you have children? Do you find me annoying? If you could ask fewer questions," Renly replied with a sigh, "maybe I would find you cute." After he finished speaking, there was no sound from the other side for a long time. Renly couldn't help but look up, only to find that the man was already in tears. "What's wrong with you?" He was stunned. "I have a foul mouth. I just said that. Don't take it seriously. In fact, I think you are quite interesting." The other party shook her head, hugged her knees, and stared at the fire for a long time, and suddenly murmured, "I'm the Queen of Westeros. I'm a Targaryen. I have everything I want. I'm also a mother, and my son in King's Landing is only 3 years old. Can you understand? He is only 3 years old. I should have watched him grow up and become a great king. But now, I'm trapped on this broken island, wearing the stinky clothes of the Dornish, smelling bad, and I don't know how long I can live. The only companion I can talk to is mysterious and refuses to tell the truth. Renly opened his mouth to say something, but the other party suddenly covered her face and wailed and cried as if she could no longer bear it. Her voice was heartbreaking, and she didn't care about her dignity and image as a queen at all. Seeing this, Renly sighed, got up, crouched down and crawled out of the leaf hut. The light of the bonfire flickered behind him, and a long and narrow shadow danced in front of Renly. He listened silently to the loud crying coming from behind. For the first time, he felt a sense of depression growing in his heart. The other party was not sad about the current predicament, nor his lie. She just missed home. Thinking of this, he looked up at the deep and vast starry sky in the sky. The appearance without a single cloud made him doubt whether he had a wrong idea, but other than that, he had no other thoughts. Am I really going to be trapped here? Renly frowned while muttering. In addition to death and completing the task, he didn't know any other ways to get out of the copy, but he felt vaguely that it was unlikely that he would stay here forever. But if he gave up halfway, as he was thinking, he suddenly felt a special cool feeling in his brain. At the same time, a message emerged. Successfully past the 30 days, you have obtained a mysterious change. Your fishing knowledge has derived a characteristic, bait for homing. Thank you to Christmas Ads Fan 00 for the reward of 1000. Thank you to Lurengia and Longping 20076 for the reward of 500. Chapter 44, The Fallen Dragon. All sounds in the ocean seemed very faint. The blocked ears felt slightly swollen after being soaked in the sea water. The sunlight pierced the swaying sea surface above, like a faint light penetrating from another world. The faint light illuminated the dark world, and at the same time, radiated countless faint floating substances in the sea water like dust. A brown-black crab claw poked out from the sand beside him, bringing up a faint turbid sand and dust. Then this small crab, that looked like a hermit crab, circled in front of Renly horizontally and finally crawled into his trouser leg. At this time, Renly was sitting cross-legged at the bottom of an ocean reef, his eyes quietly staring at the deep and hazy sea world in front of him. His face, which was illuminated by the faint light, had no expression, and his hair was floating upwards, like a clump of black seaweed. Countless cold currents penetrated into his body from all directions. The chill was getting worse, but he could not feel any pain and suffocation caused by a lack of oxygen. There was also a faint chill invading his eyes, so the sour feeling brought by the seawater was constantly weakened. But Renly was already familiar with all this, so he did not pay much attention to the changes in his body, but stared at the hazy and unclear area in the deep sea in front of him. His face did not show any emotion, but he was expecting something in his heart. The change happened not long after. A silver-black eel suddenly broke through the hazy seawater and rushed towards Renly from the depths of darkness. But when it arrived in front of Renly, it changed its previous irritability and turned to slowly circling around him, occasionally approaching and touching his naked upper body with its cold mouth. Renly ignored this loach-like fish. He was still staring ahead, waiting for a target to appear. After a while, another brown and black eel sprang out again, and like the one before it, began to swim around Renly. Then came more fish. Fat whiting covered with brown spots, flat silver-scaled pomfret, ugly-looking barracuda, densely packed small herrings. The fish from the underwater world came in scattered at first, but as time passed, more and more fish came in one after another, and finally the darkness completely covered Renly. Only then did he grab a fat salmon, then kicked off the ground with his legs, and rushed upward with a cloud of turbid sand. The surrounding fish were startled and scattered, and then gathered around the figure's legs like a black tornado, and until the other party broke through the sea, they reluctantly dispersed in all directions. Renly climbed up the rocks on the shore, and exhaled a breath of cool air. Then he bent down, to pick up the linen shirt on the reef, and put it on. The hot clothes made him feel warm and comfortable, but then he frowned, lowered his head and shook off his trouser legs, and a small crab was thrown out by him. The big silver salmon in his hand was out of the sea and twisted its body uncomfortably, but it was not violent, and it seemed that it had no intention of resisting Renly. I feel embarrassed to eat you like this, he muttered, looked at the sea beside him, and then looked thoughtfully at the clouds gathering in all directions above his head, and then carried the obedient fish towards the forest at the end of the beach. The homing bait rewarded not long ago has an interesting feature. It allows Renly to attract a large number of fish in the seawater, as if he himself has become a powerful bait. This made his diving and catching fish extremely easy. He could even pick and choose, as if he was visiting a fish market. At this time, Renly was wearing a brown linen short-sleeved shirt and pants of the same color and material. His bare feet stepped on the pebbles in front of the beach, leaving a trail of wet footprints. The pants soaked in the seawater seemed a little heavy and black, but soon became lighter due to the heat of the surrounding environment. Stepping into the palm grove covered with fallen leaves, bursts of trivial noises continued to come from all around. Sneaky mice, silent lurking venomous snakes, buzzing beetles, and big crabs that looked hard and fat lying on the trees with their claws stretched out. The triangular shed made of leaves and branches was built at the edge of the woods, close to the water source. There were palm trees all around. Not far away, on a low rock, a washed red satin top and trousers and 2 brown black leather jackets were drying. A black-backed herring gull was squatting on Renly's jacket, pecking at the soft material on the side of the leather lining with its beak. Renly rushed forward to chase it away, and the bird fled in panic, and a burst of laughter came from behind. Turning around, Rhaenys, who was wearing similar clothes, was squatting in the open space in front of the leaf shed, making a fire and boiling water. Seeing Renly looking at her, she pretended to be displeased and said, "Why are you chasing it away? I'm betting whether it will poop on your clothes." "Betting with yourself? You are really boring." Renly rolled his eyes, walked closer and handed the fish in his hand to her. "Strange, how come you can catch salmon every day? Are there schools of salmon around here?" she asked in confusion after taking it, but she didn't expect that. As soon as it left Renly's hand, the fish, which had been obedient, immediately began to struggle vigorously. Unprepared, Rhaenys didn't hold it firmly and let it fall to the ground. She screamed and squatted down and reached out to hold the fish tightly. There was no sound, but there was a huge force in her slender hands, so the fish's eyes bulged and the struggle became very weak. All this made Renly's eyelids jump. But the other party stood up, as if nothing had happened, threw the fish in his hand into the boiling shell pot beside him, and didn't dislike the dust and leaves on the fish at all. This was their 19th day on this island. Since Rhaenys cried a while ago, she became docile, or rather, she worked harder and harder, and didn't mention the past, nor did she emit negative emotions. Except for sometimes sitting on the beach in a daze, she seemed to have really cheered up. Not only did she start to take the initiative to share various tedious tasks, but she was even thinking about cooking fish soup by herself. In the clearing in the forest, the bottom of the large shells that were carefully selected were charred by the flames. The boiling water in them kept overflowing with bubbles at the edges. As the fish stopped struggling, a special smell gradually spread out. It was obviously not a good taste. Renly, who was sharpening a branch with a dagger, suddenly remembered that the other party did not scrape the scales or process the fish, but just threw the fish indirectly. But seeing that this person was squatting in front of the fire with an excited look, he did not dare to remind him. So it was obvious that the fish soup would not be drinkable this time. The hot-boiled fish was finally cut in half by the dagger. Looking at the half-fish body with mixed internal organs rising from the big shell with bursts of heat, Renly felt that his picky eating problem seemed to have come back again. He looked up at the opposite side of the fire. The woman sitting on the tree stump seemed to be quite satisfied with her masterpiece. Now she was using the dagger to cut a piece of fish meat and put it into her mouth to chew. So he didn't think about it anymore. After sighing, he turned the dagger in his hand and began to cut carefully. However, while cutting, he suddenly felt that the surroundings were a little quiet. He couldn't help but look up, but found that the woman opposite had already put down the food at this time, sitting there with her chin supported by her hand, staring at him with a pair of purple eyes without blinking. "What's wrong with you?" Renly asked. Looking at him quietly, Rhaenys didn't answer for a long time, but when Renly was about to ignore her, she suddenly said, "You know, when I was a child, I thought about what would happen if I wasn't a Targaryen." Renly raised his eyebrows when he heard this, but the other party didn't stop talking. "If I were from Westeros, I might be born into a lord's family, and I would never be able to escape the fate of being arranged for marriage. If I'm lucky, I'll marry someone my own age, but if I'm unlucky, it'll be an old man." If I'm from a small lord's family, my parents might be too poor to afford a dowry, and I'd be sent to be a nun, or lower my status, and marry a loyal knight who gets lucky. Being a nun isn't bad, but it's bound to be boring. If I were a peasant girl, it would be terrible. I'd most likely be married to a man with a foul mouth, who might be a drunkard or a loser. I might also be targeted by a lord, and give birth to a bunch of illegitimate children, whether I like it or not. As she spoke, she saw that Renly's expression seemed very strange, and she couldn't help but glare at him. What are you looking at? I'm so beautiful, I'm sure I'll be targeted. The lords of Westeros are always barbaric. They even have such a terrible right of first night. Do you know how I felt when I first heard about this? I don't know, but I can imagine it. Renly shrugged. This is not the worst. Rhaena said, outside of Westeros, there are slaves everywhere. You can be beaten and scolded, and no one will take care of you if you are killed. If you are beautiful, you will be sent to be trained as a slave girl when you are a few years old and learn all kinds of things. If I was born there, I might as well die early. So you are very lucky. Renly echoed. As a Targaryen, you are the only one who can enslave others. Who dares to enslave you? Yes, the Targaryen family motto is blood and fire, she murmured, and suddenly sighed. But if there is no dragon, whose blood will flow? Whose house will be burned? Renly, who is about to replace him and become a royal child, actually has a say in this, but he didn't say anything. The man in front of him was just feeling a sense of loss after losing his dragon. The atmosphere fell into silence for a while. Renly didn't speak, and the other party's eyes staring at the fire were also a little dazed. It was not until the flames became a little weaker that she looked at Renly again. Am I pretty? She asked. Her short silver gold hair had now grown to ear level. Her face was delicate and neat, her purple eyes were moving, and her emotions of joy and sorrow made her look a little weak, but also unique. This was actually an obvious thing, so Renly nodded. The other party's mouth curled up when he saw this. So what is your impression of me? How do you feel? I don't think you look like 35 years old at all. Renly's words made the other party narrow his eyes, but then he smiled happily. Instead, you look like a 15-year-old girl. So she couldn't help but say, you know, I tried to test you at first, and I suspected that you didn't like women, but later I found that you were not unresponsive, but more polite and well educated, not like those stinky men in Westeros at all. So now it's another test? Renly felt that the other party was teasing him. You can think of it this way. Rhaena rested her chin on her hand and looked at the black-haired man opposite her intently and said slowly, I'm actually ready. If we are trapped here all the time, then is there any other possibility? You are a good man, knowledgeable and polite. Although you always lie, I can feel that you really want to help me. Most importantly, I don't hate you. When she spoke, her eyes were inexplicable, like happy and sad, relieved, but also with a trace of imperceptible depression and decadence. After hearing the voice, Renly didn't say anything. After looking at the other party quietly for a few times, he suddenly put down the shell plate in his hand, stood up and walked out of the woods. I'll get another fish. This one is not edible at all. Rhaena was stunned when she saw this, and then hurriedly shouted, then come back early. I think the weather is not good. Renly waved his hand without looking back, looking up as he walked. In the sky outside the cumbersome shade of the trees, the endless clouds have become gloomy and black at this time, and the coolness felt around is also getting worse. The wind is blowing, and it's very strong. Thank you to the book friend Tewuzen Ren for the 600 reward, and thank you to the book friend 140,115,123,902,868 for the 100 reward. Chapter 45, The Fallen Dragon. It was not quiet at all before the storm came. Thunder roared overhead, and the roar of the waves could still be heard clearly through the forest. The palm leaves surrounding the triangular shed were constantly blown by the wind and fluttered in chaos, making a fierce rustling sound. The two people who had leisurely chatted during the day were now busy reinforcing the small shed. At the same time, they placed dense shells on the surface of the flat stone not far away. Although they had a water source, the water source was turbid and the water level dropped significantly every time they took water. It did not recover much the next day, so they would not miss the opportunity to replenish the water source. However, when the storm really came, they found that this preparation was completely useless. The dark clouds covered the originally clear sky with gloomy darkness. The strong wind was accompanied by countless bean-sized raindrops falling obliquely. The sound of leaves and heavy rain hitting each other mixed with the sound of the forest being blown violently, which seemed violent and chaotic. It wasn't long before a bigger downpour began to pour down. The huge impact from the sky and the strong wind blew the neatly arranged shells everywhere. Even those that were fixed were the same. Most of them disappeared into the dark forest soon. Rhaenys was not worried about the storm. After all, she was no longer at sea. She claimed that she never got sick. When the rain just started, she ran out and raised her head to drink a lot. Unfortunately, she came back like a drowned chicken, looking gloomy. Can you imagine the feeling of being slapped in the face by the water? Renly was staring at the huts on both sides with caution. He was a little worried about whether this sheltered shelter could withstand everything outside. He glanced at him, but then he looked away. The other party's nagging did not stop. There has always been a legend in Valyria that the land of the setting sun will breed a disaster that will destroy the whole world. So the ancient dragon kings only built an outpost on Dragonstone Island on the edge of Westeros and had no real intention of coming here until our family. I didn't believe it at first, but now I believe it a little bit. As she said this, she suddenly discovered something and was stunned, then smiled cunningly, and then stepped on a small step and deliberately swayed in front of Renly, but accidentally stepped on a slippery puddle that seeped in from the edge, and even fell flat on her face, making her already wet like a drowned chicken even more embarrassed. Screams and laughter therefore resounded in the triangular shed here. Unfortunately, they were not in the mood to play like this after a while. Just as Renly worried, this small shed could not last long in the storm. When a strong wind came, the wooden frame firmly fixed on the ground and the tree forks on both sides could no longer support it, and it collapsed to the side with a creak, and the whole shed shrank and collapsed instantly. The two had to flee hastily holding a few large banana leaves, and then withered together on the side of a nearby big rock in the heavy rain. Unfortunately, this stone could not completely block the wind and rain, so that the two people leaning against each other were soaked and became more and more embarrassed. The violent noises around them continued to come, and the black sky above their heads also rumbled. The woods on all sides were deep and dark, and occasionally with the flash of lightning, bursts of pale rainforest scenes emerged. There was a voice beside him, but it was not heard clearly because of the loud noises around. But after a while, Renly felt that the woman next to him shrank into his arms and then buried her face in his clothes. The warm breath and the touch of cold skin made Renly feel a little strange in his heart, but this emotion quickly disappeared without a trace under the continuous cold attack. The rain was pouring, and the sound of rushing was drowned in the endless darkness. The strong wind was mostly blocked by the big rock behind him, but it could not completely stop its harassment. The rocky surface he was leaning against was higher than the surrounding land, so there was no water accumulation due to the heavy rain, but the constant scouring from the top of his head was still unbearable. In the woods, he could vaguely hear the sound of waves crashing against the rocks in the distance. A little brown squirrel that was soaked to the skin had come over and was now staring at Renly carefully, with its nose twitching. Renly saw it and grabbed it and covered it in his hand. The dampness was everywhere, and the coldness was constantly penetrating and settling deep into his body. For some reason, the endless coldness made him feel a little confused, and he even fell asleep in the end, and all the chaos around him was left outside the darkness. When he woke up again, the surroundings had become peaceful. The sun was high above his head, and the warm sunlight kept driving away the coldness in his body. The leaves and branches of the trees beside him kept dripping water. The ground where his palms were leaning was still wet, but the big rock behind him had become much drier. The sound of the sea breeze blowing the leaves was slow, and the sound of the waves hitting the rocks in the distance was also clearly audible. The person in his arms had left at some point, and the little squirrel in his hand had also disappeared. He stood up and stretched his body, and his bones made a crackling sound. Renly glanced around and heard a faint movement. So he walked towards the woods on the left, and soon saw Rhaenys looking up and pinching banana leaves. Come on, we have to start over. The other party obviously heard the movement, so she shouted without turning her head, I won't get sick, but you may not. You have to be thankful for this, otherwise we will have two troubles. I hope you really won't get sick. Renly thought to himself, but he didn't refuse and walked forward, and then followed to collect the necessary raw materials for rebuilding the shed. But he didn't have much hope for this. I have a hunch that doing this will be a waste of effort. After picking a banana leaf, Renly said to Rhaenys beside him, "Why?" The other party turned his head and looked at him strangely. "Of course it's a storm," Renly replied. "I think it's the season for heavy rains. Look how many times we've encountered it." Rhaenys nodded in agreement, but then said, "We can't just do nothing. You'd rather sleep on a rock than sleep on a rock." Renly smiled and changed the subject. "I'll go to the beach and see if anything will wash up there. Come back soon." Rhaenys nodded and suddenly leaned over to kiss Renly on the left cheek, then smiled at him and turned to continue working. Renly was a little stunned by this and touched the place where he was kissed. He couldn't help but say, "We won't be trapped here forever. You don't have to be so desperate." "Really?" the other party asked without turning her head, as if he was just saying it casually. "Even if this doesn't work, I can think of other ways. Even if nothing works, you'll be the only one trapped, and I." Renly hesitated to speak, looked at the other party's busy back, sighed, and then turned and walked towards the beach. He was a little absent-minded along the way, but when he arrived at his destination, he still cheered up and began to check the surrounding environment. Unfortunately, after circling the entire island, he did not see anything he expected. In the shallows of the island covered by sunlight, there were no other foreign drifting objects, except a few coconuts and a broken wooden barrel. Renly was a little disappointed, but he didn't think about it anymore. He took off his upper body clothes, walked to the edge of the reef and jumped down. After a splash, the black-haired figure completely disappeared in the shallows. It was not until half a while later that he floated to the surface with a salmon and walked towards the direction of the residence. The situation seemed to have returned to the previous situation. However, not long after, another storm suddenly came. Thank you to bookfriend E322 for the reward of 1000. Thank you to Uncle Joel for the reward of 600. Thank you to bookfriend Half Body as Buddha and bookfriend Never Meet the Old People in the Deserted City for the reward of 500. Thank you to bookfriend Flower Eating Patient. Bookfriend Calm and Silent and bookfriend 99 bottles of orange soda for the reward of 100. And thank you to all the friends who vote for this book every day. Thank you. Chapter 46. The Fallen Dragon. Although they had just experienced a storm not long ago, when the second storm came, the two were still in a mess. After the wind and waves calmed down, Renly even found that he had caught a cold. This made him quite depressed, and Rhaenys was a little worried about it. Although colds and flu are not serious diseases, they can still kill people in this era, especially in their current situation, where there is no medical condition at all. Renly didn't take it too seriously. He even walked towards the beach without waiting for his clothes to dry, wanting to see if there was any harvest this time. Then he dragged back a broken sail with a mast. At this time, Rhaenys was staring at the messy camp in some confusion, not knowing where to start. When she heard the noise, she turned around and looked, and she couldn't help but be stunned on the spot. Red wine. She looked at Renly with her mouth open, and he nodded. A bunch of dark purple grapes on a blue background, the emblem of the red wine family. The name sounds insignificant, but it is actually very important to them. The red wine family is loyal to the Tyrell family of the Reach in Westeros, but in fact their family is much older than the Tyrell family, who became the Lord of the Reach after the Conqueror War. The family is famous for its abundant wine production, and the fleet owned by the family is also one of the few naval forces in Westeros. Renly couldn't be more familiar with this family, because during the Siege of Storm's End, it was this family that blocked the sea, while the Lord Tyrell family and other lords of the Reach were responsible for the land. He also knew the location of the Arbor Island, the territory of the Red Wine family, in the Summer Sea in the south of Westeros. It is basically on the same line with the southern coast of Dorne, which is the coast where the two were once. They must have had a ship damaged near here last night. Seeing the other party's stunned expression, Renly said, "Next we have to keep a close eye on it. Maybe there will be people in distress, washed over by the current, or they will find this island and swim over, just like us back then." "You mean, we are likely to be saved because of this?" Rhaenys couldn't help asking. It was impossible for a simple stranded person to save them, but if someone came to search and rescue in the future, that was not certain. Renly meant this, so he nodded. That's right. Weenie's mouth twitched when she heard this. She wanted to remain calm, but she couldn't help but smile. In the end, she no longer suppressed her emotions and hugged the person in front of her and cried with joy. Renly smiled and patted her back. He could feel her joy from the bottom of her heart. At the same time, he felt as if a big stone had fallen from his heart at this moment. Although it was still possible, this kind of thing still depends on God in the end. Facts have proved that God seems to treat him well. However, what he originally expected was not the so-called red wine, but the Dawn ship. He thought that the fact that he had set sail from a certain place in Dawn not long ago could not be hidden from the Dawn Lords for too long. If those people knew about it, they would definitely try their best to go out to sea to find and hunt them down. Now it seems that, although it is unclear why red wine came to the nearby sea area, the situation is much simpler. After that, neither of them spoke again, and they were all immersed in this good news. It was morning, and the fresh air was accompanied by the warm and pleasant sea breeze. The sun hanging high in the sky above also exuded waves of warmth. The surrounding woods rustled, and the sound of the tide hitting the reefs remained the same, but when they heard it again, a different taste came to their hearts. But not long after, Weenie's excitement suddenly cooled down. She broke away from her embrace and looked at Renly's face with purple eyes. Her expression became a little complicated. What's wrong? Looking down at her, Renly still smiled. The other party opened his mouth and then forced a smile. Nothing. I just think I'd better repair the house first, otherwise I'll be bitten by mosquitoes at night. Then you look for the raw materials first. I'll go to the beach to keep an eye on it. Renly turned and left after saying that, and the broken sail in his hand was also thrown back in place. Unfortunately, he did not find anything else except the sail that day. After returning to the camp, the atmosphere that became much more silent also made him a little disappointed. The shed was not built that night, and neither of them slept well. But when they woke up the next day, the atmosphere here seemed to have returned to its original state, and the cheerful little queen became lively again. When we return to King's Landing, I can show you a hill named after me. I plan to build a big garden there. Squatting in the camp and drinking lemon leaf tea, Weenie's turned her head and smiled at Renly, who was also squatting next to her. I have planned for a long time, but I haven't found a suitable gardener. Maybe I should go to High Garden to have a look. It is said that many people there know this. I won't go to King's Landing with you. Renly, who was brushing his teeth with a small branch dipped in the ashes of the fire, replied vaguely, that city stinks. It stinks now, but it will get better in the future. Weena said, just like my kingdom, it will get better and better. Renly couldn't help but turn his head to look at her when he heard it. Why? You don't believe it? The other party asked with a raised eyebrow. Of course I do. Renly nodded. The establishment of the Targaryen dynasty marked the beginning of a new era for the continent of Westeros. In the past, the Seven Kingdoms were independent and wars seemed to be going on at every moment. However, after the unification, despite the constant civil unrest and political conspiracies, it was much better than the original chaotic situation. However, this dynasty did not live long. Compared with the feudal families and the ancient Seven Kingdoms with a history of more than 1,000 years, the Targaryen dynasty was overthrown within 300 years of its establishment, and it was Renly's cheap elder brother who took the lead. What was dramatic was that he, a member of the usurper family, came here to chat with the founder of the Targaryen dynasty. I wonder what her expression would be after she knew this. Renly thought secretly and suddenly remembered that the kings of the Targaryen dynasty were all descendants of the blood of the little queen next to him. If it was really based on the theory of bloodline, this person seemed to be his ancestor. In the following period of time, he picked up many broken planks and broken wood on the beach of the island, as well as some items with obvious civilization, such as silver plates, broken wine barrels, etc. On the third day after the storm, he saw a pale male corpse. The corpse that kept floating back and forth with the tide made Renly a little silent, but this emotion was not brought into the camp. The next day he saw several more dead bodies and more supplies. Although this was useless, it strengthened their confidence. Although there was no gain in the next few days, the two still had expectations for it. The days seemed to have returned to the past, but the atmosphere had some subtle changes. For example, Rhaenys no longer had physical contact with Renly casually, and her clothes and daily life were not as casual as before. Some behaviors became serious. At the same time, she would deliberately keep a large distance from him when pulling the bedroll every night. This was to avoid suspicion, and Renly had expected it. He has always understood and believed that some of her emotions some time ago were just the broken jar idea formed after she felt hopeless about leaving. Or she instinctively wanted to find an emotional sustenance, to rely on each other, in order to spend the rest of her life. Obviously, this is not love, but a helpless choice. For Renly, this is a responsibility. As a passerby, he does not want to, and cannot bear this responsibility, and Renly does not think that the two will really be trapped here forever, at least he will not. So he has always responded negatively to this. He can pretend not to know these things, and then be casual and unrestrained, but some things can be lied about, but some are difficult to make up their minds to do. At this time, a ray of light appeared in the predicament, and the other party no longer thought about it, but wanted to maintain a simple friendship. Renly thought that this was good, at least he didn't have to always think about whether he was a fool. However, one day, the other party said something to him intentionally or unintentionally. It's really small here, and you can't see many things. What do you want? Renly, who was squatting on the ground blowing his nose with a leaf, after catching a cold, looked up at her. Nothing. The little queen blinked, and then suddenly asked, do you know what tansy is used for? And safflower? Renly was stunned when he heard it, but the other party turned around and walked away with a smile. The change happened 5 days after this conversation. Another fierce storm suddenly came, with a strength similar to the previous ones, but when Renly went to search the beach the next day, he found a living person. Thank you for giving me face, book friend, the $1,000 reward, and thank you for the 500-star Admiral of the Mongolian Navy book friend. Chapter 47, The Fallen Dragon. A pale young man appeared in the quiet forest camp. He leaned against a palm tree, wearing a wrinkled woolen grey cloak soaked in seawater and dried in the sun, and a red and blue satin top underneath. At the same time, the boots he wore were made of top-grade calfskin, silently revealing his identity and wealth. However, facing the short-haired woman in plain linen clothes, he was like a beggar meeting the richest local businessman, stuttering and full of awe. Are you really Princess Rhaenys? At this moment, Rhaenys no longer had the expression and attitude she had in front of Renly. Instead, she became much more serious. After hearing this, she nodded and said, we were chased into the sea by the Dornish, and the storm stranded us here. Her words made the young man who was lying there couldn't help but glance at Renly, who was standing next to him. The other party's obvious Dornish appearance made him stunned, but he didn't dare to ask more. Instead, he said weakly to the little queen, I'm Leo from the Redwine family. Slit Redwine is my father. Your Majesty, I'm happy to serve you. But I'm sorry that I can't stand up and salute. I really don't have the strength. I won't blame you for this, Celio. Rhaenys said, looked at the other party's pale face, nodded and said, rest assured first, when you recover, I will still have many things to ask you. Thank you for your understanding, Your Majesty. The other person bent over with great effort, then collapsed back to the ground, gasping for breath, looking weak and as if he could die at any time. Fortunately, after drinking a bowl of hot fish soup and taking a nap, his pale face had become ruddy. Facing the questions of the two people at the same time, he opened his mouth to explain one after another. We were hunting Dornish fishing boats nearby and looking for some compatriots who had been shipwrecked not long ago, but we encountered a storm. Oh, you may not know yet. Now everyone says that you have been killed in Dorne, and His Majesty Egan ordered our family to send a fleet to block the Dornish coastline and prevent them from going out to sea to fish, but this damn storm has caused us heavy losses. I'm not sure if anyone will come to rescue me, Your Majesty, but if my father heard that my ship had sunk, he would definitely come to search for me. If I remember correctly, there were several ships that were not damaged in the storm. Maybe they would remember where we were shipwrecked. But I'm not sure about this, Your Majesty. I'm not sure. If those ships were really not damaged, why didn't anyone rescue me? His Majesty Egan is currently in Dawn to avenge you. But we don't know exactly where His Majesty is. But we heard that the Dornish tried to use crossbows to fight His Majesty and suffered heavy losses. The Dornish seem to be in an internal conflict. I heard from a captive that many people died, but I don't know the details. They are rowing their boats out to sea like crazy. We didn't know why at first, but now we understand. Still weak, the nobleman named Leo fell into a deep sleep soon, but the influence he brought, or the follow-up, completely changed the current situation. On the 4th day, after he was rescued, 5 tall and majestic multi-masted ships emerged from the end of the coastline. They did not sail towards the island at first, but Renly on the shore saw the opportunity and raised a pile of signal black fog made of wet leaves and branches. So these ships changed their course soon after. The 5 ships did not approach the coast of the island in the end, but floated on the sea not far from the island. But several small boats approached with the sailors' oars, and finally a group of people went ashore. The leader, an excited old man, looked similar to Leo, and the front of his satin shirt was embroidered with the emblem of the red wine family. The young noble who had regained some mobility took the lead, while Renly and Rhaenys stood on the beach. Soon after, the old man walked over quickly, knelt on one knee, and respectfully kissed the little queen's outstretched finger. "It is an honor to see you are still alive, Your Majesty. Slit Red Wine is happy to serve you." The island life that lasted for more than a month basically ended here. Facing the resurrected little queen, everyone who came was respectful. Rhaenys, who looked like a little girl to Renly, had become as dignified and noble as a real queen at this time. She treated the people around her with a majestic expression, as if she was a saint in the clouds. However, when this person got rid of those people and found Renly sitting in front of the tree roots at the end of the beach, he returned to his former smiling appearance. "We are leaving here. Are you happy?" Renly shook his head. "I want to stay on the island and not go with you." "Are you still asleep?" the other party asked with a smile. "Or are you suddenly angry?" "I'm serious," Renly said. "I plan to stay here for a while before leaving." "How to leave?" "You know my ability," Renly said seriously. "The sea can't stop me." "I don't believe you can leave here by walking." Rhaenys frowned quietly. "And there is no need for this. What can you do by staying here?" "It's very important, and I can't tell you." The little queen was stunned by this, and then narrowed her eyes. "Are you scared?" "Why should I be scared?" Renly asked curiously. "It's not like I haven't been on a ship before. Why should I be afraid?" "You," Rhaenys bit her lip, her face a little angry. "You should be happy." Renly ignored her expression and waved his hand, saying, "Although we are friends, many problems have not been solved yet. But forget it now. I don't want your money, nor your dragon eggs, and I can't help you with anything else. As for you, you have returned home safely and got rid of me, a burden. What a good thing." "I'm angry. Don't joke anymore." "I'm really not kidding." Looking at the expression of this person, Renly gritted his teeth. "Okay, to tell you the truth, although I don't know why, but those storms during this period were all caused by me, so I can't go with you. Otherwise more people will die if we encounter a storm again, and all this will be in vain." Unfortunately, the other party didn't believe him. "You just said, do you really think I should be happy?" "Yes." Renly nodded. As soon as the voice fell, the other party turned and left. Seeing this, Renly sighed, feeling as if he was playing a game of crying wolf. If there is no accident, it will be a farewell today, and he actually has a lot of reluctance. But even if they were reluctant, there was nothing they could do. After all, they were not from the same world, and they had to say goodbye anyway. It would be better to be decisive in their words and let everyone part ways in peace. However, after a while, footsteps suddenly approached from not far away. Looking up, the little queen who had left was now walking over with a wooden cup. "I'll make you a cup of tea at the end, as a way of repaying you." She handed the cup over and said expressionlessly, "Are you serious?" Looking at the cup of tea in front of him, Renly raised his eyebrows unconsciously. "What? Are you afraid that I will poison you?" Rhaenys said with disdain. "You saved me. I can't not thank you, right? But there is nothing on the ship. I remember that you like lemon tea, so I made you a cup." You have to know that not everyone can drink the tea I made. Renly smiled when he heard it, took the wooden cup, and put it aside, saying, "Don't worry, I will visit you in King's Landing, when I have the chance. After all, we are considered." He didn't finish his words, because he just tilted his head slightly, and a huge force suddenly came from the back of his head. He couldn't help but stagger. Renly stood up immediately, but he couldn't hide his dizziness, and even staggered. He stared at the beautiful figure with a mixture of surprise and anger. "You, stupid girl." Before he finished his words, a fist coming from the front instantly made his eyes black, and then with a plop, he fell to the ground with his head raised. "You don't know anything. You are a stupid man." Rhaenys looked at the bruise on his forehead with some heartache, and then kicked Renly hard. "That's how I'll be happy." With a snort, she turned and shouted orders to the group of people not far away. "Come on, bring him to the boat." Thank you to Chang Xiangxi 166 for the reward of 1000, and thank you to Sukubo and 99 bottles of orange soda for the reward of 100. Chapter 48 The Fallen Dragon. A storm suddenly hit, and 2 of the 5 ships sank directly. Dozens of crew members were missing in the process, which was no different from death. The other 3 ships also had many leaks and broken places under the ravages of the storm. One of them was even tilted and declared scrapped. Fortunately, each of these crew members was an old sailor who had been sailing for many years. With their efforts to rescue, they did not sink. After the storm, the dark clouds in the sky slowly dissipated, revealing a ray of morning light illuminating the wet deck. The sea was still boundless, and the sea was turbulent. The sailors who escaped death were busy repairing the ship inside and outside. It has been a while since the voyage, and the remote island has long been left behind, but some things on the island are still vivid. So when the storm stopped, the noble Queen Rhaenys immediately walked out of her room and walked towards a room deep in the cabin. At this time, she had changed into a silver dress with Mirish lace trim, and the long sleeves revealed the golden silk lining. Her originally messy short hair was also combed neatly and smoothly, and the silver golden curls made her look more than 10 years younger. Her footsteps made a sound on the wooden floor, and the guards of the Redwine family followed behind her, protecting the queen who had escaped death. However, when they arrived at their destination, they could only be ordered to stand guard outside the door. After tidying up her slightly messy hair, the little queen immediately pushed open the black wooden door in front of her. The creaking sound attracted the attention of a young scholar in a grey woolen scholar's robe in the room, who then stepped forward and bowed. "Greetings, Her Majesty the Queen." The little queen nodded to him, and her eyes looked at the black-haired figure sleeping on the bed in the corner of the sealed room. "How is he?" "He wakes up every night," the young scholar replied in a low voice. "Eat and exercise." "Did he say anything?" the little queen couldn't help asking after hearing this. "According to your instructions, we locked him in the room and didn't dare to get close to him. We just heard something vaguely." The bachelor glanced at the queen in front of him and hesitated, but after the other party's frown, he still spoke. "Some disrespectful words. Your Highness, forgive me." "They are all words like stupid and idiot. Don't pay attention to what he says." Hearing this, Rhaenys glanced at the sleepy man and said disapprovingly, "He is a liar. Remember, don't believe a word he says." The young bachelor nodded in response, and then whispered, "I suggest using sweet sleep grass instead, Your Highness. The effect of the sleep grass will become weaker and weaker with the number of times it is used. I think it won't be long before he will be completely immune to it." "You said that sweet sleep grass can be fatal." The little queen frowned when she heard this. "As long as the amount used is controlled, and it is not used frequently, this may be very low, Your Highness." "That won't work either. I just want him to be safer, but I don't want him to be in any danger." Rhaenys denied. "You keep a close eye on him. If that doesn't work, just tie him up for me, or lock him up." About this, the young bachelor suggested, "Can we use shackles?" "No shackles. That won't work. You have to make sure he can't leave this room." "But Your Highness, if we don't use shackles, we might." "I'll send 2 more people to you." The little queen could guess the man's concerns, so she interrupted him. "But they are just helping. You still have to keep an eye on him, and report to me in time if any physical conditions occur. At the same time, if he really recovers, you'd better not talk to him too much, and also pay attention to some special methods he may use." "Can I ask why, Your Highness?" The bachelor couldn't help but say, if I need to take care of his physical condition, it's hard for me not to talk to him. Then you must remember what I just said. He is a liar. The little queen said this, but she couldn't help but smile, and then she said with a stern face, if you really want to talk to him, you'd better be careful. The maester nodded in response, but secretly disagreed. However, Rhaenys didn't care what he thought. Her purple eyes looked at the person in the corner. Her expression became a little complicated, and she ordered, go down now, I want to stay here alone. After the words fell, the young maester in the grey robe bowed and left, and Rhaenys gathered her sleeves, and walked to the bed, and then sat on the chair at the head of the bed. The room fell into a brief silence, until half a while later, the solemnity on the little queen's face quietly dissipated, and at the same time she couldn't help saying, don't blame me for treating you like this, but I really don't want you to leave. I'm even more afraid that you'll lie to me and run away secretly. You have that ability, and I can't stop you if I don't do this. But I can't figure out what you're thinking about. Are you afraid? The Dornishman didn't tell you to be afraid, so why are you afraid of this? The other person fell into a coma, so naturally no one answered her question, and Rhaenys didn't need anyone to respond. She sat at the head of the bed, quietly looking at the face in front of her, muttering to herself, I've written a letter, and I've decided to keep my promise. There is a golden dragon egg in our family. I asked someone to bring it to me. When it's brought to me, I'll consider giving it to you. Yes, I can consider this. Then you have no reason to leave, right? As she said that, she couldn't help but stretch out her slender fingers to touch the other person's cheek. The elastic feeling that was no different from that of a normal person made her frown unconsciously. Who are you? The faceless man should have a name, right? It's been so long, and I still don't know your real name. What do you look like? Are you ugly? Why did you save me? How many of your words are true? Countless questions made her frown even tighter. Thinking about it, you are really a complete liar. But I will always ask you about your true feelings, unless you really don't want the dragon egg anymore. As she said that, she frowned and fell into deep thought, as if many things were bothering her. But after a while, the worry on her face quietly stretched out, leaned over and looked at the sleeper for a few times. She smiled, then gathered up her sleeves, stood up and prepared to leave. But as soon as she turned around, she suddenly thought of something, turned around and said to the man on the bed, you'd better be able to sing, because I like men who can sing. After that, she hummed a melodious tune, and walked out the door, seeming to be in a good mood. But the moment she pushed open the door, the joy in her heart instantly dissipated. Sister Visenna, how come? When did you come? Thank you WDZZDK for the 1000 point reward, and thank you Otaku and Zyanatang24 for the 100 point reward. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 49, The Fallen Dragon. Sister Visenna, how come? When did you come? A silver-haired female warrior was standing outside the door. She was wearing a full set of enameled black and red scale armor and a velvet cape embroidered with dragons and flames. The buckle on her chest was a golden metal dragon inlaid with rubies. She was tall and her deep purple eyes were staring at her sister who looked a little like her. Are you in love with him? Her voice was quite cold and her words were to the point. Obviously, she heard some noises in the house. This caught Rhaenys off guard. She looked at her sister in astonishment and opened her mouth, but nothing came out. However, she didn't need to speak. The woman named Visenna could clearly see everything she wanted to see from the other person's face, so she lowered her voice. Don't forget that you are married. This made the stunned little queen raise her eyebrows. Yes, with my own brother, and one of his 2 wives. The queen frowned when she heard it. Don't be so willful. You are not a little girl anymore. As she said that, she glanced at the unconscious man in the cabin, frowning even more. He saved you, and we will give him the reward he deserves, but you'd better stay away from him, and don't let Egan see him. That's none of your business. The little queen said without thinking, and then changed the subject. Where are my dragon eggs? The other party pointed to the feet, where an unmu box with silver edges was quietly placed. Seeing this, Rena squatted down and opened it. A touch of gold bloomed in front of her eyes, and she squinted unconsciously. Queen Visenya, looking down at her sister, said, at this time, the Dornish claimed to have captured you, but they couldn't hand over any of your tokens, so we thought you were dead. He saved me. I have already said that in the letter. The other party answered absent-mindedly. Queen Visenya frowned again when she heard this. I came to you as soon as I received the letter, but I didn't have time to inform Egan. The little queen couldn't help but look up at her sister, who saw this and said, your husband is very angry now and is avenging you in Dawn. I'm going to inform him that you are not dead. Do you need me to say something? Ask him to help me burn a few more Dornishmen. Renly answered without hesitation, especially those in Hellgate. That's all? What else? Tell him I'm on my way to King's Landing. Don't worry about him. I hope you don't regret it. Queen Visenya looked at her sister deeply and turned away. At this time, the ship was still slowly swaying forward on the rippling ocean surface. The 3 huge grape embroidered sails were bulged tightly, but there were no sailors on the deck, and they had obviously avoided it in advance. Above the ship, a dark yellow dragon with huge wings was circling in the sky. As Queen Visenya walked out of the cabin and screamed, the dragon's loud roar suddenly sounded in the sky and quickly spread to all directions, startling many sailors on another ship not far away. Then the dragon landed, and the steady floating ship suddenly creaked under the pressure. Climbing onto the dragon's back nimbly, Queen Visenya patted its neck to signal, so the dragon that had just landed kicked its legs and jumped towards the sea below. But at the moment of landing, it flapped its wings and rushed to the sky above, and finally turned into a small black dot and disappeared from everyone's sight. Although there was no farewell, the movement outside was very obvious. When her sister left, Rhaenys finally breathed a sigh of relief, then turned around and looked at someone in the room, feeling a little headache. What should I do with you? She walked into the room with the box in her arms, raised her foot to hook the dark wooden door and closed it, then sat back on the chair in front of the bed, thought for a moment, held the dragon egg in her hand and carefully placed it under the unconscious man's armpit. After looking at him for a few times, she couldn't help but sigh, and then murmured in a low voice, my sister asked me to hide you? But where can I hide you on the sea? Hesitantly, she changed her mind and suddenly raised her eyebrows. Why should I hide you? They don't know anything. You saved me, I thank you. What's the matter? Egan should repay you. These words calmed her down a little, but she was still worried, so she sat there and thought quietly again. Unfortunately, not long after, her heart, which had been temporarily put down, was suddenly raised again. A terrifying roar suddenly came from outside the cabin, and it was still loud through the wooden planks of the hull. The sound made Rhaenys tremble all over, and then she hurried to the deck outside the cabin, to see 2 dragon riders approaching here quickly in the sky ahead. The one behind was Visenya, who had just left, and Rhaenys couldn't fail to recognize the huge black dragon in front. Aegon Targaryen, her brother, and also her husband. The little queen was a little flustered, but she didn't have much time to react. The black dragon had already descended and approached. The huge body hovering over the ship covered the sky, and the fluttering wind blew some sailors who had just walked out of the deck to the ground. The dragon named Balerion did not land on the deck in the end, because it could not be put down, but when it was flying at low altitude, a tall figure jumped down from above and ran quickly towards the woman at the end of the deck. Rhaenys. He stepped forward and took the little queen's hands, his face full of excitement and joy. Egan, how come you are so fast? Just now, Visenya said. The little queen's expression was stunned and a little weird. The visitor couldn't help but think of some things he had heard before, and a trace of worry flashed in his eyes, so he said, where is the Dornishman who saved you? He is a warrior and a hero. I must repay him, and if possible, I will use him. Rhaenys opened her mouth when she heard it, but before she could say anything, the other party looked at the entrance of the cabin in front, as if he had thought of something, so he let go of his wife's hand and stepped over. Wait a minute, Egan. The somewhat panicked voice behind him did not attract Egan's attention at all. He entered the cabin wearing heavy armor, and the wooden ladder at the entrance and the wooden floor of the cabin creaked when he was stepped on. Someone came forward to bow and saluted, and then was ordered to lead the way. I mean, I still have a lot of important things to tell you. Egan, wait a minute. The little queen followed behind him with her skirt lifted. Nothing is more important than my gratitude now, Rhaenys. I can't imagine life without you, and you can't imagine how desperate I was when I heard the news of your death. The other party said without turning her head, and her footsteps did not stop. Rhaenys became more anxious after hearing this, but then a look of determination appeared on her face, as if she had suddenly made up her mind. I just want to tell you this. These words made the back of the person in front tremble, and then the steps became more hurried. However, all thoughts and impulses stopped abruptly when they arrived at the door of that room. At this moment, whether it was Rhaenys with a firm gaze behind her, or King Egan who raised his hand and pushed the door open and looked serious, they all froze on the spot. There was a sweet smell in the air that came to her face, which was the special smell that emerged from the long-term residents of the potion, but there was no one here. Looking at it, the closed room was silent at this time. Several bottles of blue potions were placed on a table together with the sea navigation map. The figure that should have existed on the wooden bed in the corner had disappeared. All that could be seen was a pile of rotten pale dust, mixed with the shriveled linen clothes and brown trousers. It looked like a human figure filled with dust, or a raised mannequin made of sand. And on the floor under this outline, a golden dragon egg that seemed to have shrunk a lot rolled there quietly. The metal-like surface flashed a dazzling luster as the light from outside the door poured in. Thank you to the book friends Geoduck in the Desert, Water Eyes Lowu and a roasted cuckoo for the 500 reward. Thank you to the book friend Big Black Park for the 200 reward. And thank you to the book friend Lore of the Wasteland for the 100 reward. Chapter 50 Return. Day after day, he woke up and slept and woke up in a cabin that was constantly shaking, but he didn't know where he was. The long sleep made Renly's mind muddy. When he woke up, he didn't think about struggling to break free. He had already set sail, and the situation was inevitable. When he was awake, he would read a book out of boredom, and then curse from time to time, hoping to attract the stupid woman who avoided him, but she never showed up. So he finally didn't bother to think about these messy things, and he seemed to be unaware that the food he ate every day contained some special hypnotic substances. He was awakened by the storm yesterday, but the situation did not develop to the worst, so he pretended to know nothing, stayed in the room and slept honestly, waiting for a certain moment to come. He didn't know when this moment would come, but it would come sooner or later, so he slept peacefully. After an unknown amount of time, a special roar revived his dormant thoughts, and a familiar, but unrecognizable voice came to his ears. Soon after, another loud roar woke up the dazed Renly. He heard footsteps fading away, and when he looked sideways, he only saw a flash of silver skirt and clothes disappearing into the corridor outside the door. Then he found that he was holding a golden dragon egg in his elbow. This made him a little confused for a moment, and he subconsciously picked up the egg and looked at it carefully for a few times, but before he could think more, his eyes quickly went black, and all the noises around him suddenly disappeared. Extreme silence struck, and in the darkness countless memories appeared in his mind one after another, and there were two messages. Successfully escorted Rhaenys Targaryen to Egan the Conqueror. Your swimming skill level has been raised to LV6. You completed all events, and you obtained a special item. Queen Rhaenys' expectation. A large number of memories that emerged quickly settled, and a certain name mixed in the information made Renly feel helpless and annoyed, but then when he opened his eyes and saw the surroundings clearly, he felt quite disappointed. Everything in front of him was dark and unclear. In the haze, there were many huge black skeletons standing quietly beside him, slumped next to a huge dragon skull. Renly found that his short body was covered with black dust. The touch under his butt was cold and hard. Looking up, the dragon skull that he could see had disappeared without a trace, and the hazy and dark ceiling became faintly visible. Renly knew that he had left that history and returned to King's Landing nearly 300 years later. He was currently in the cellar of the Red Keep in King's Landing. The dragon skull that originally stood here has turned into a piece of black dust. Merathis. He murmured the name of the dragon, but he was thinking of the female dragon rider, Rhaenys Targaryen, the last child of Varian Targaryen, the Lord of Dragonstone, and Lady Valerian Valerian. the sister and queen of Aegon the Conqueror, was born on Dragonstone in 25th BC. She is lively, curious, impulsive, and loves dancing and music. During the War of Conquest, she rode the dragon Meryxes and attacked the Stormlands with Renly Baratheon, the founder of the Baratheon family. In the end, they completely defeated the Storm King Argilac Durandon in a battle called the Last Storm. Storm's End surrendered, and Renly Baratheon married the Storm King's only daughter. The Baratheon family, which is still prominent today, was thus established. Rhaenys Targaryen then participated in the battle known as the Raging Fire, and together with her brothers and sisters, she destroyed the coalition forces of the Westerlands and the Reach. The royal family of the Reach, which had been passed down for thousands of years, was burned to death in this battle, so it withdrew from the stage of history. The Tyrell family, who had been the stewards of the Reach royal family, took over and became the new lords of the Reach. After this battle, Rhaenys rode a dragon to the south of Westeros to force Dawn to surrender, but failed. The war officially broke out 4 years later, but it also had little effect. In the end, she died at the Dawn Hellgate in the 10th year of the conquest. Renly memorized a few passages in the history books by heart, but at first he only thought of them as a paragraph of text, but now, to him, these words have taken on another meaning. His mind was in a mess, and finally Renly sighed with a complicated expression, and then he stopped thinking about it, and looked down at his hands. He thought of the dragon egg, but when he looked down, he saw an egg that rolled into the gap between his legs, covered by the hazy darkness. Renly was stunned for a moment, then stretched out his hand to pick out this strange egg that looked about the same size as an egg, but the surface seemed to be covered with golden scales. This thing looked light, but it felt as heavy as a lump of iron in his hand. "Is this the dragon egg?" he murmured, holding the egg upright in front of his eyes and looking at it carefully, his expression full of uncertainty. "I remember correctly, the egg I saw before was clearly the size of a baby's head. How come it has become like this now?" He thought unconsciously of the Nagarib that seemed to have shrunk a lot after the last instance. "It's so small, can it hatch a dragon?" Renly frowned, but suddenly thought that, even if this was a real dragon egg, he might not be able to hatch a dragon, and even if he could hatch a dragon, he might not be able to ride a dragon. Although he had the blood of the Targaryen family, in the long history of the dynasty, there were more than just the Baratheon family that obtained the blood of the Dragon King through marriage, and historical records show that even the Targaryens themselves sometimes couldn't hatch, or even ride a dragon. So he casually put the egg into the pocket of the lining of his upper body and decided to study carefully what he could do with it after returning. His blue eyes looked at the last remaining item beside him. It was a bunch of silver gold hair wrapped in red silk. It felt smooth and flexible when picked up and held in his hand, as if it had just been cut from a beautiful woman's head. After taking a closer look, Renly found a line of words written on the red silk wrapped around the hair. He was startled when he saw it. "I like men who can sing." When he saw the words clearly, it was as if a female voice was whispering in his ear playfully. When the voice fell, the hair in his hand suddenly turned into a hazy light mixed with gold and silver, like a group of silver gold fireflies, floating up from Renly's palm. The faint light emitted by the fireflies dispelled the surrounding darkness and covered Renly's cheeks with flickering. Finally, when the lights floated up to parallel with his line of sight, they gathered together, like a kiss, gently pressed against, and disappeared on his forehead. At the same time, a piece of information was born from his mind along with a lot of related memories. "You got the profession, Bard. Thank you Uncle Joel. Book friend 161,211,131,358,140. And book friend Orachi for the 500. Reward. Thank you book friend Oshano for the 200 reward. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.